I'd like to call the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone, and may I have some order in the room, please? I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd like to ask people to take their seats and to basically quiet the conversation, which is rather loud at this moment. I like the energy after all the big weekend game and so on, and it's carrying through, and I get that. And so this is great. My Raptors jersey, it's under the suit, absolutely. Take it off on Thursday. So, good morning and welcome to meeting number 5 of the Economic and Community Development Committee. I'd like to welcome the committee members as well as visiting councillors. I see none at the moment, but more importantly, the members of the public that are here with us and the media. Ladies and gentlemen, you can follow the agenda and the debate on your computer or tablets or your smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. The Economic and Community Development Committee acknowledges that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and Wendat people, and is home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. All right. Members, are there any declaration of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, thank you. May I ask for a confirmation of the minutes from the April 29th meeting? Deputy Chair Grimes, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. We have, moving through, any additional communications, Madam Clerk? Okay. We have a number of speakers, and I'll just go through them. Members, we now are going to go through the agendas, and there's a number of items here that are for presentation, and ask members to hold any items that they may have an interest in. Members, I would also tell you that I will be looking to see the time arrive at 10 o'clock. I understand that there's going to be a major announcement made this morning, and there were some motions that I was going to move that perhaps are not necessary now. And so I understand the Premier will be making some announcements, and we're looking forward to hearing the Premier later on at 10. And so if we have to come back, we may have to come back and reopen something, but I think at the moment we could proceed, and I'm very buoyed by what I think will be some good news coming forward. All right, and so we do have a visiting member of council coming, Councillor Nunziata. Welcome to committee. Okay, members, moving ahead. EC 5.1, Greater Toronto Airport Authority update. Looking forward to that. I understand that the chair and David Wilson's here, and I will officially sort of read his bio when we get to that item. So we'll be holding that item down. The next item is the EC 5.2. That's the economic outlook. And Councillor Carroll, you had asked some time ago for a presentation on this. I understand the general manager will be making a presentation. Mr. Williams?
As well as the
Yes, so that will be done at midday then, at 12, right? So we'll hold that. EC 5.3, Toronto Paramedic Service multi-year staffing and system plan. So I will be holding that because that's a presentation. Mr. McEachran, the acting chief, and I want to take that word out, acting. I don't have the authority to do that, but I'd like to see if we can encourage that. Madam DCM, I think he's earned the job, quite frankly. I'm fairly biased. I'm making that bold statement, right? So, did I put him in the spot? Where is Gord? Is he here? He's hiding. Sorry. So, well, that's too bad, Gord. We love you. So we're going to hold that one down. EC 5.4, supporting survivors of human trafficking. We have a number of speakers on this particular item, so we'll be holding that item. Moving ahead, members, EC 5.5, amendment to contract number 47020-428 for provision of overflow preventative maintenance and repair services on vehicles of various classes. I'm going to hold that because I think we should ask some questions just to clarify, but I'll hold that, Councillor Grimes, I'll hold that in your name? Sure. Okay, thank you, Councillor Grimes. EC 5.6, pilot skate exchange program and skate lending at city-operated rinks update. Okay, Councillor Ford is going to hold that. I'll just put your name. You're welcome, Councillor. EC 5.7, local art service organization, lassos, and 2019 grant allocations. Okay, Deputy Chair Grimes is moving that. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. EC 5.8, grants to Specialized Collections Museum, 2019 allocation. What say you, members? Okay. Councillor Cressy is moving the item. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. EC 5.9, Major Cultural Organizations 2019 grant allocations. Okay, Councillor Cressy is moving this item. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. EC 5.10, support of the inaugural Toronto Biennale. Yes, I know that. I've actually attended Biennale, the Biennale of Arts 2019. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So the Biennale budget is going to council. All right, EC 5.11, appointments to the Business Improvement Area Boards of Management, wards 12 and 15. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. All right. So 12 is going to be dealt with at the same time as EC 5.12 will be dealt with at the same time as EC 5.2. So those will be dealt with together at noon. And then finally, EC 5.13, improving the Imagination, Manufacturing, Innovation, and Technology Local Employment Requirement. That's the IMET, right? So, okay. So, pardon? There are speakers. Yeah, yes, there are speakers. So I'll hold that down, okay? Great. So, no, because the announcement. It's going to be fun. Okay, members. We are now moving to item number 1, and that's the Greater Toronto Airport Authority update. I'm always looking to this update because there's so much that we learn. We have two presenters this morning. We have Laurie McKee, Director of Government and Stakeholder Relations at Greater Toronto Airport Authority. We also have David Wilson, who's the Chair of the Greater Toronto Airport Authority Board of Directors. David is the former chair and CEO of the Ontario Securities Commission, and he is now retired following an extensive career in the Canada's financial and service industry. Prior to his appointment to the Ontario Securities Commission, David was vice chair of the Bank of Nova Scotia and chair and Chief Executive Officer of Scotia Capital. You both are no stranger to this committee. It's always a pleasure to have you, and welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. It's nice to be back. And good morning to other members of the committee. Thank you all for your time this morning to share with us an update on the activities at Euro Toronto Pearson. As Councillor Thompson said, my name is David Wilson. I'm a director of the board of the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. And as Councillor Thompson said, I'm joined by Laurie McKee here on my left, Director of Public Affairs and Stakeholder Relations at the GTAA. I was nominated to the board of the GTAA by the City of Toronto in November 2011. I was chair of that board from May 2015 until earlier this month when my 4-year term as chair ended. Mr. Doug Allingham now takes over my role as chair of the board as of a couple of weeks ago. And I will continue to serve as a director and member of the Audit Committee, Governance Committee, and the Ad Hoc Search Committee, which I'll speak about in a minute, until May 2020, when my maximum term of 9 years will have expired. I'm very pleased to be here once again to share with you an update on the key activities and strategic priorities for your Toronto Pearson. As Councillor Thompson said, I have strong roots in the city. I've worked here most of my life. At the present, I'm on the board of the GTAA, and I'm chair of CAMH, the hospital on Queen Street that you all know about. Earlier this year, we announced that our president and CEO, Howard Eng, will retire from the GTA in March 2020 after 40 successful years as an airport executive, culminating in 8 tremendous years at the helm of Canada's largest airport. Howard has not only led Toronto Pearson to new heights, both in terms of our worldwide connectivity and the service that we provide to our valued passengers, he has also fostered a business-like commercial atmosphere with customers which in turn has contributed to the airport's very strong performance. Under Mr. Eng's leadership, Toronto Pearson has emerged as a global mega hub and has experienced unprecedented levels of growth, passenger service, and financial sustainability. Since assuming the role in 2012 as CEO of the airport, total traffic at Toronto Pearson has grown by 15 million passengers per annum. For the second year in a row, Toronto Pearson is recognized by the Airport Council International as the best large airport in North America. Mr. Eng is also recognized for his work to connect the airport to the ground transportation in the Greater Toronto Area. We can cover that later on this morning. The GTA has initiated a process to replace Mr. Eng and is conducting an international search. I am chairing the search committee of the board looking for Mr. Eng's replacement. Consistent with the commitment that Howard has shown to the airport throughout his tenure here, he has graciously agreed to stay on to ensure a smooth and orderly transition when his successor is selected. I'll now hand over the presentation to Laurie McKee, who will take you through the slide deck. Laurie, please.
Great. Thank you, David, and good morning to you, Councillor and Councillor Thompson. As David said, we have seen significant growth at the airport. We're adding about 2.5 million passengers every year. Last year, we finished the year just shy of 50 million passengers, and our forecast is to grow to 85 million. We're adding more destinations and carriers, and the benefits, of course, of an airport in terms of trade and jobs and economic activity continue to also grow. We also work very hard to manage the impacts that an airport does have on its neighbors. You can see on the screen here the way that growth has materialized since the GTA took over. The first 16 years, we added 10 million passengers. We added the next 10 million in 4, and we expect to add the next 40 million passengers in 20 years. We're carefully planning our operations to make sure that we can accommodate the growth that's coming through investments in modern terminal infrastructure, new baggage systems, and I'll talk a little bit more about the ground side, which we've focused a lot on in the last couple of years. Pearson is on the cusp of becoming what we would call a mega hub airport. You can see on the screen some airports that are very familiar to you, I'm sure. In North America, there are 2, Los Angeles and New York, and we think Toronto Pearson has an opportunity to sort of play in this elite world of airports. These are airports that have more than 50 million passengers. A large number of them are international. And what we find, though, when we look around the world is that having a mega hub airport really does drive prosperity given the connectivity that it provides to a local community. Pearson was ranked the 5th most connected airport in the world. Heathrow, you can see on the screen, is number 1. We're number 2 in North America next to Chicago, and this means we have 72% of the world's global economies can be connected from Pearson through daily direct flights. As David mentioned, we're really proud that for the 2nd year in a row, we've been ranked number 1 in 40 million passenger airports in North America for service quality. So that's something we're very proud of and really do thank the employees and the 50,000 people that work at the airport for delivering on that. The benefits that an airport can bring, there's 5,000 people that work at the airport that are residents of the City of Toronto. If you look at that, the jobs that are facilitated as a result of aviation, there's 60,000 in Toronto. And then as a result of our buy local policy, there's $180 million spent in businesses in the City of Toronto. We're very active in the community. We have open houses that we host and talk to residents about the airport and its operation. We have a street team, which is a group of 4 students that have been hired locally, and they're driving around in a van this summer, setting up a tent and talking about the airport at local community events. We've been out at some environment days for councillors already, and you can see Councillor Ford's on the screen there with the mayor attending. We've got a number of others coming up as well. And we do attend community events when invited, so you can see the Bloor West Village Residents AGM was one we attended last month. We have a target to become one of the Imagine Canada companies, which means investing 1% of net profits. So we have, through our community investment program, which is called the Propeller Project, invested in 2018 just over $1 million in 24 organizations, groups like Mabel Arts, Newcomers Kitchen, Rexdale Women's Centre. As well, we sponsor quite a few events in the community throughout the City of Toronto and across the region. We also work closely with our local municipalities, including Toronto, to make sure that the airport is reflecting the city. We have YYZ Live, which again is having musical entertainment from Toronto artists in the terminal buildings. We work closely with Invest Toronto, Toronto Global, on the bid for Amazon headquarters. And last week, when Collision was happening in Toronto, you had welcome screens in our arrivals hall welcoming delegates, and we're working with Tourism Toronto right now to make sure we understand the conferences that are coming to town, conferences like Jehovah's Witness, which are coming later this summer. We've been talking a lot about transit. You can see some of the challenges that we're facing in terms of congestion, but some of the opportunities as well. We've got Pearson's located in the heart of the second largest employment zone in the country. Downtown Toronto is #1. The lack of ground connectivity, though, means there's a million car trips a day into that region, and we only have about 10% of passengers and employees that are taking transit to the airport. This is why we've been advocating for what we've coined Union Station West, which is to have better connectivity to the airport from a ground transportation perspective, to look more like some of the best airports in the world, like Frankfurt or Schiphol or Hong Kong. We're also smack dab in the middle of a big city region, and so ground connectivity is important, not just from an airport perspective, but by connecting employment nodes across the region, innovation corridors. Here's a map showing the different transit lines that are important for the airport that we've identified. The Finch LRT, Eglinton LRT, looking at improving bus connectivity in the near term. A big project which is looking at bending the Kitchener Go corridor into a new facility at the airport. We've had some success in terms of support for Union Station West. The Regional Board of Trade in Toronto endorsed the project. We've been working with TTC on planning and advancing some better connections for routes and frequencies. We have a couple of workshops coming up and another one coming up later this month with the TTC, and we're working with city staff on some we've called sort of listening tables that focus on how we can better connect Toronto to the airport. We were very pleased with the provincial announcement on Eglinton Crosstown and the recognition of it in the provincial budget. So that's a critical line to bring Union Station West to life, we think, and so we'll continue to work with Metrolinx on a partnership to study the lines. We've invested $40 million in a partnership with Metrolinx to advance the study work on the bend into the airport of the Kitchener corridor, as well as the various transit lines, and we'll continue to do that work to bring those lines to a place where we can look at the business cases for further investment. Of course, an airport, as I mentioned earlier, does have impacts on its community, and so we work very hard. We have our second 5-year noise management action plan that was rolled out last year, and our staff are working through that, looking at quieter fleet for the airlines that fly at the airport, as well as the flight paths that NAV Canada manages. With that, I'll turn it over for any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Our first questioner is Councillor Ford. Councillor Ford, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I always want to start before I ask questions, but to thank the airport for being here and the great work they do in our city, and particularly for the residents of North Etobicoke. So as the airport grows, and I think you mentioned this in your presentation, so it's my questions aren't really about anything new on here, but to talk about the airport as a whole. So you employ 5,000 people, but you have a greater impact than just those 5,000. I know you mentioned 60,000 indirect jobs, and then I didn't hear you mention about the greater airport employment zone. Could you just talk about that a bit and the relevancy to that?
So the airport employs 5,000 Toronto residents. We actually employ 50,000 overall. 5,000 of them are residents of the City of Toronto. Airports are magnets for investment and head office locations, and as a result, the lands around Pearson are a significant area of employment. The Neptis Foundation did some work a couple of years ago, and they were looking at employment nodes across the region, identified, not surprisingly, that City of Toronto downtown is the largest employment zone, but the second largest in Canada is actually this airport employment zone that you mentioned, that's around the airport. So that magnet really does help to drive investments, help to drive companies making their choices where they're going to locate, and really does lift up the community in terms of opportunities for jobs.
Mm-hmm. And understanding that magnitude, and Mrs. McKee, you mentioned about not being an investment, about the AZ being the second largest employment zone in the country. In terms of just pivoting right now, and once again you mentioned it, but to transit investment, how critical is that on your radar right now?
It's very critical. When we think about the airport and the capacity it requires, we think about it in three ways. You think about what your airside can handle, runways, taxiways. You think about what your buildings, the terminals can handle in terms of passengers, and that's check-in counters and baggage carousels and systems. We also think about what we call the ground side, and that's sort of the road and the transit connections to the airport. Pearson really has fallen behind when we look at our peers around the world in terms of the number of people taking transit to the airport. If you look at Schiphol or Heathrow or Hong Kong, a much larger percentage of people are taking transit, in that sort of 40%. Even Vancouver with the Canada line, they've increased the number of people taking transit to about 30%. We have about 10% mode split. So from a sustainability perspective, we think that isn't sustainable.
Right.
We can't keep building parking garages, and we can't just keep building bigger roads. As traffic continues to grow, and if you think about the airport growing from today's passenger count of 50 million to 2037 of 85 million passengers, we really need to change that so that there's more people. And the way to do that is through investments to transit that connect to the airport.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ford. Councillor Carroll?
Yes. Just got a little distracted by the Premier's announcement there. I remember my questions, though. The employment zone, is Partners in Project Green still going on?
Yes, it is, and we still continue to be, we were the lead sponsor to start it, and we continue to be involved and co-chair it.
Oh, okay. They were working on, when I finished my membership there, they were working on really just trying to increase the group transport in some way, from having a shuttle around the employment zone that would make it more attractive if you had to travel in for business and things like that, to make it more attractive to keep them there, but to have them shuttled such that you could get off at Pearson and not even need to rent a car if you were doing business in the employment zone. Are they making any headway on that?
We've been working with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority as part of the Airport Employment Zone Coalition, as we call it, which is the group that's come together to advocate for better transit. One of the, I talked about it as a listening table, so one of the listening tables that we'll be hosting in the next month or so is going to focus on what we call that last mile connection.
Yeah.
You're right. When you have that many businesses located so close, what are the best ways to try and build those connections? Is it traditional transit, or is it some of the disruptive technologies, or is it just a van? I mean, so we are hosting a workshop. I believe it's been scheduled for July, and TRCA will be part of that.
Okay. And the numbers, I don't see page numbers. If I'm looking at only 10% of passengers and employees take transit to get to Pearson. Best in the world do much better. Those numbers, Hong Kong 50%, Schiphol 40, and Shanghai 60, that's actually public transit, is it not? If we change that, if we had that number evaluate group transport of any kind, like hotel shuttles and things like that, their percentage is even higher, I'm guessing. In Schiphol, I couldn't even find where you would get in an individual taxi. It took me forever to find where you would even get one.
I don't know what the numbers are if you include those
Yeah,
types of vehicles and services.
We're even farther apart if you start to include those. So, two things. I think I've talked to you about this before, Lori. My dream is that you have what you have in Hong Kong Central Station, where I just got rid of my bag in the morning, and it makes its own way to the airport. And I'll get on the train to the airport later. Is there any headway being made on making that possible from the Up Express, where I just got rid of my baggage? I now have my boarding pass, my baggage is gone, I never have to think about it, so that we might generate more interest in it. And is there any headway? I'm looking at the transit map, and I see the possibility of bending Go into reach there, of having something like the Up Express that runs across the top of the city, so that transit to the airport becomes a suburban option.
I don't know the status of the drop off your bag, get up to the
Yeah.
airport, and it arrives separately. There's security issues around that, but you're quite right. Other airports have figured out how to do that.
Figured it out,
So,
yeah.
I will get back to you on that. The connection across the city, that's really fascinating, because we did some work 2 years ago now, and we expected to see the largest number of people traveling into the downtown core from the west.
Yeah.
And while there's a large number, and many of them, I think about 42% of them can take transit because it exists, there's actually a larger number of people that are traveling from the western GTA across what we call the midtown of the
Yes.
city, and then even more traveling the northern arc, so going to Richmond Hill, Markham's, and that.
Right.
So we're seeing travel patterns for people as other sort of employment nodes across the region really grow. And so we need to think about is how do we make sure that the transit options exist for those people to get from where they live to where they're working and back.
Right.
And so
I had one other question. I don't know if the chair wants me to just throw it in there.
Final question.
Is that whether or not Pearson is in fact having a provincial conversation, so that as they fill out the Premier's most recent map and any conversations they might be having with other GTA regions, that Pearson is central to their design process? Are you embedded in that conversation?
are you talking from a transit perspective or aviation?
Well, from a transit perspective, but I'm not limiting it to our transit map. With their plans for GO, their plans for any new lines in the GTA region, are you embedded in that conversation? If not, does the City of Toronto have an advocacy role to make sure that you are?
We're always happy to have advocates in support of better transit to Pearson, so welcome that. But yes, we are. So the partnership we have with Metrolinx is doing studies that are looking at region-wide, how do you better connect the airport? Obviously, you mentioned the Kitchener GO band.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big project, but strategically, it's a game changer for Pearson if you could actually get the heavy rail to connect into a new terminal facility that we're building.
Yeah.
But we are working region-wide across from Halton, Durham, Kitchener-Waterloo, et cetera, trying to build that support.
Fantastic.
Thank you very
Okay,
much, Councillor
thanks.
Carroll. Anyone else a question? I've seen none. Okay. Just a few questions for me, and it's a perennial one that I ask each time you're here. and it's about expansion with respect to the GTA. You have demonstrated, obviously, your success and the growth that's taking place. You're looking at growing up to 85 million people. There has been, I guess, a 30-year conversation taking place about the Pickering airport. There were, a few years ago, much more activities taking place. I saw some of the signs in protest, but also some of the review or studies that potentially were going to be done. Where are we within our lifetime? Will we see another airport in the GTA in light of the fact of the growth that's taking place with you here at Pearson?
I'll start, Councillor Thompson. Laura can add. Very timely question. There are lots of conversations happening between Howard Ang and the people out in Durham who are anxiously looking for support for an airport in that region. In many ways because they've had a bit of a hit with the closing of the Oshawa Auto activity. So there's lots of conversations. The CEO of GTA, Howard Ang, has been in those conversations. He's been very constructive with the people in Pickering that are pushing for action. So it's an issue where I think I can quote Howard accurately. At some point, we need another airport in this big city, and the land is there, and so GTA is supportive of that notion, and we'll help any way we can. Lori, what do you want to add?
Just the numbers in terms of demand. I mean, the long-term demand for aviation is for about 110 million people to want to be traveling through the region. So if our capacity is 85 million, there is opportunity for other airports to grow. We have established what we call the Southern Ontario Airports Network. So it's a group of 12 airports across the region that are working together. Transport Canada is represented on that group as the owner of those lands. Ultimately, it's not our decision. It is a decision of Transport Canada whether or not there's an airport built there, though.
Thank you. On the economic impact of the airport, I would say 10 years ago, when you came in to have a conversation, you were not as full the connecting airport as you are today. We've seen the growth in terms of the number of jobs, 5,000 people from Toronto who work at the airport, 45,000 people from elsewhere working there, so that is your total of 50. But the indirect impact of jobs being second largest employment area, could you speak to that and see both in terms of the growth aspect, benefits, and the lack there of transit in terms of the connecting aspect?
So the larger number is about 330,000 jobs that are in the airport employment zone. And the challenge without transit is the ability for that to continue to grow. When companies look to locate, they obviously need to get access to talent. One of the biggest challenges for companies today really is you locate in places where you can get workers to your door to fill those jobs. And so that's become a bit of a challenge. We know the lands just south of the airport corporate center, they are running a private shuttle to the Kipling subway station because businesses are having trouble getting people to get out there to take those jobs, and so they run that shuttle and pay for it privately. In order to continue to allow this area of the city to grow, we need that better connection with transit so that businesses will continue to locate there.
Okay, fantastic. And with respect to collision, which you reference, the conference what was just held last week, a big part of the decision in terms of coming to Toronto was the ability to connect and bring people here instead of one flight as opposed to a multitude of flights coming through. There are other events and conferences that are also benefiting from the structure of your airport as well. Could you perhaps speak to that? Do you see more conferences coming through as a result of the ability of people to be able to have a direct flight to Toronto and the importance of that?
I think those were some of the benefits that we provided when we gave stats and information to Toronto Global when the bid for Amazon was. It was the flights that could be offered to Amazon to the places that they needed to get their goods and their people. I'm just looking for a stat because I saw...
While you do that, part of the reason of asking that question, because there's always the issue around noise and runway and so on. So juxtaposing that, there is a balance that we actually try to create because you try as best as possible to minimize the impact on the overall community. Is that correct as well?
Of course. I mean, planes are getting quieter. but they don't make no noise. And so we're continually working with technology, with the air carriers and Nav Canada to try and minimize the impact that we have on our neighbors. There's 6 ideas that have been rolling out in coordination with Nav Canada, and they're all designed to reduce the impact that aircraft have on communities. And the stat I was looking for, Councillor, it actually came out of Invest Toronto, Toronto Global. It said that Toronto has broken the North American record for the number attending meetings and conventions in 2018. It was the only North American city in the top 10.
Okay.
And so that's a stat that we can help to celebrate with you.
We've come a long way. All right. Thank you very much. Councillor Grimes, a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just getting back to the mega hub, you mentioned mega hub, but there's only 2 in North America, that's correct, right? What makes us a mega? What classifies as a mega hub? Is it the amount of people coming through, or?
Mega hubs are sort of loosely defined as airports with more than 50 million passengers, airports that have a significant number of passengers that are international, and Pearson is second only to JFK and New York for international traffic. 2/3 of our passengers are international. And they really, it's an airport that sort of punches above its weight, and it drives prosperity through direct connections. So the ability, as Councillor Thompson mentioned, is you're the hub, so you're not having to connect somewhere else to get to the airport. 72% of the world's economies can get to Pearson on a same plane direct flight. And so that ability really to connect directly to all those centers, so you're the hub and the center, as opposed to having to go somewhere else to get to where you really want to go.
So how close are we to becoming a mega hub, and how do we do that? Tough question.
We're on the cusp of becoming a mega hub. At the board table, we talk about the strategy being to push towards mega hub status, and we're on the cusp. We had Air Canada's CEO and senior executives came to a board meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they are designing their strategy to make Pearson a mega hub, hubbing flights from the U.S. into Pearson to go elsewhere. So it's happening. We're on the cusp.
So are we months away, years away, couple years away?
Give us a number. You, Lori?
I
On
would,
the spot, Lori.
in the next 2 to 3 years.
Oh, that's great news. And on the heels of Councillor Thompson's questions about Pickering, that in Oshawa way, what about Hamilton? I know swoosh is beginning. I hear a lot of people now flying out of Hamilton. Is that an advantage to Pearson or a disadvantage?
The Southern Ontario Airport Network that I mentioned, Hamilton is a part of that. The 12 airports that are part of that group, all of those airports have been seeing growth as the economy grows. The theory behind it is, as all airports grow to serve a local niche demand, the economy's growth, we all get a little bit. So it's sort of sticky. So we benefit as Hamilton grows. We benefit as Waterloo grows, Lake Simcoe Airport grows. Hamilton's in particular has really grown in a niche in the cargo space. And what you find is that sort of network of airports, not dissimilar to London, UK, where they've got major international airport with a series of regional airports, or the New York area with a major international airport and a series of regional airports. That's sort of happening in Toronto, where Pearson is long-haul international with a number of other airports that supports point-to-point, whether it's general aviation traffic, flight school activity, business aviation, cargo activity, low-cost activity.
An important thing that's happened, as Lori mentioned, the Southern Ontario network of airports. Howard Ng, when he came, decided that being rivals with Hamilton or Oshawa or Kitchener was the wrong approach. We should be partners. We should cooperate. There's lots for everybody to do here. And so the culture has changed, and these Southern Ontario airports are now cooperating, talking with each other. Catalyst is Toronto Pearson, but there's no rivalry anymore. It's cooperative, is the message.
Great. And just one last question. Is the growing responsibility plan, and we had a few years back when the expansion of the runway, and there seemed to be miscommunication, but it seems there have been some strides made in that. I know the wider aircraft are coming, carrying more people on these larger aircraft as part of the plan to reduce, not a small part, but you seem to be getting out there a lot more now. As we saw in the slides, you're going to the environment days and getting out there with the traveling van. So things for me is being close to the airport is kind of quieted down. Are you feeling the same way about it? So you're getting out there and...
Yes, I think that's a fair summary. We learned from the construction, the repaving of one of the runways a couple of summers ago that the communication is critical, so people know what's coming. And if you got to repave a runway because it's it's time. You have to make sure people know it's coming, and it's only temporary. So we've learned a bit, and we're doing the job thoroughly.
Great, thanks for coming down today, thank you. Mr. Chairman, those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grimes. To speak, Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I will be brief. But I think it was a couple of years ago I made kind of the same speech in this committee that I am about to right now. First, I want to thank the airport for being here today, as I said earlier, but for all the work they do, not only in my community, which I know very much about, but you do across Toronto. And I think in this committee we talk about economic development, and many things drive economic development in our city. The downtown core, the diverse range of industry and business in our city, the tech sector, and I can go on and on, our convention centers, our hospitality industry, and what have you. But what is at the core, for me, and the pillar of our economic growth in the city of Toronto and the region is the airport. I am encouraged to see the growth of the airport, the employment at the airport, how many people we are bringing into Toronto, and supporting all, not just our local markets here, but connecting to national and other international economies around the world. So as we continue to do that, which the airport is doing, and being a partner with the City of Toronto, I also think to connect another big topic for Torontonians nowadays is transit. And as the airport grows, we need to be looking as a city, as a province, which I know has been happening, and I would categorize as full force in terms of transit investment and planning. Is of course, and I will put this out here, the Eglinton LRT being one of many projects on the go, and I think that is vital to connecting Torontonians to the airport and vice versa, and connecting travelers into the city, and of course going back to that concept of supporting our economy. But on more of a local side, it's about connecting the residents that I have the honor of serving in North Etobicoke and giving them options to get to work in a different mode, and getting out of the car and getting into transit, which is what we all try and endeavor to do. So I think with these conversations that is happening, and I want to thank the airport for their continued commitment to our residents in North Etobicoke and the City of Toronto.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ford. Councillor Carroll to speak.
Well, I guess it really just follows on what Councillor Ford was saying. And the question I asked about whether or not we need to be advocates to make sure that Pearson is in the conversation about the transit connections there, because our new experience, the experience we're having most recently, is that there isn't a lot of willingness to have us in the conversation. But if Metrolinx is there and they're talking to our transit designers, and if Pearson is there and they're talking to both ours and the others, then I think we can consider that a voice at that table, as long as there's a great partnership. I ask about the suburban options because I think that's absolutely crucial. Here we are investing in our employment zones that are outside the city core. And yet it's really hard to say to people, you have to find another way to get to the airport. For me to say to someone, go and get on an airport bus that you can get at Yonge and York Mills, it's not top flight. It's not going to happen. And so we have to get to the point where we have that easy way. I'm not going to let go of the off-site baggage terminal concept. I know that the GTAA proposed one of their own that could somehow be part of the Crosstown expansion project. That, even that, I think would be a game changer for not only City of Toronto folks, but GTA folks. Because once you get over to where I am, where Councillor Lai represents, once you get over to North York and Scarborough, we also have the pleasure right now. Don Mills subway station is a place where YRT transit connects. Those buses may well be asking to go all the way down to the crosstown once it exists, which means there would be a very easy way to get from the east side of the city over as far as Kennedy and beyond. And so to keep talking about, are there ways to add to that, and you're going to stop wheeling that bag from that moment that you choose public transit, that to me is a real game changer. And I'll give you an example. I have a business trip that I'm going to take to New York that is being paid for by the people who are doing it. You'll see it in my disclosure next quarter, I guess. But the hosts of the business event said, and where should we pick you up? Should we pick you up at City Hall or at home? And I said, well, I'm going to be at work. I'll just take Up Express. They will not accept that. No, we must limo you to the airport. I don't want you to. It's much more fun to take the Up Express. I don't want to sit in your car and stress. But culturally, they feel like they're not taking care of me if I don't get in a car. That's a failure on our part to build a culture around the luxurious experience of just getting to the Up Express. And I think the game changer there is because that is where you will drop your bag and get your boarding pass. That's the one thing left to build the culture that no business would ever think of doing anything but just taking you to the Up Express and ushering you onto that line. And so I'm going to keep harping on it every time GTAA comes to do their annual report. And as I've said, be a voice and an advocate for them to achieve that. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think Councillor Carroll came up with a new tagline for the Up Express. I don't want to stress, take the Up Express. So there's free advertising.
New hashtag. Councillor Lai, speak.
That's a good one, actually. First of all, I'd like to thank you. This is my first year listening to your report, and I hope that I have many more years to come, and every year is going to be better and better. And having come from a city which is a mega airport here, Hong Kong, and I really think that I can see there's so much to grow in Toronto to be able to keep up with some of these bigger mega airports in the world. And I would be very proud to witness this growth. And I guess the thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of economic development and job growth is about the airport area, the employment zone. I can see with some of my real estate background, I think we shouldn't be doing any kind of infill in that area because we need to have a whole good master plan in that area, so it will be all good mapped out, and so that we will have the have the best benefit for the economic growth of the city of Toronto. So I wanted to see that area to be very nicely master planned, and also the other wish that I have is that maybe perhaps we will one of these days have transit that connect the airport to my ward, which is Scarborough. And I don't see Scarborough on this map here, with all these good transit. But I think I agree with the other councillors that I think we should have the conversation at the table for transit so that our airport are well served. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lai. Okay. So I want to thank you both for being here, and it's always a pleasure to have you. When you come, we get really good news from you. It gets better and better, and it's gotten much better over the last 10 years, and so we've been at this for that long. First of all, I want to move receipt of the presentation that's being made to us. I want to say, firstly, about Howard Ng. Howard has come to us from having been involved in airports around the world. The mayor and I visited Hong Kong, and Howard actually showed us around. It was interesting how revered he was, the way people actually came to talk with him. It is as if he had never left, because he had left so much as a great footprint there, as he's doing here in Toronto. And he's our very own Canadian Howard Ng, who's gone around the world and has done great things, has come back. We've learned from him, and we've gotten his talent, his expertise, and so on, which is actually going to continue to help us to grow the airport. We know that there are many things that are not perfect about the area in terms of transit, which we've identified. I agree with Councillor Carroll in terms of the off-site baggage loading and so on, getting it to the airport. It is such a phenomenal experience, having tried it in Hong Kong, where having meetings during the course of the day, and I was able to drop my luggage off at 9 o'clock in the morning, got all the things I needed, didn't have to worry about it, and later on all I needed to do is to get on a train to get to the airport, and I was there. Didn't have to worry about it. I saw my luggage when I arrived home, and it worked really well. So if they can do it, we can do it. Anything anybody else can do in the world, we can do better, right? That's just our game that we're actually on. So the leadership of the board, has been stellar. Mr. Wilson has been at the helm now. He's told us how long he's been there, and he's still going to be involved. He has brought what I believe is a real sense of leadership to the board and the membership there and so on. And this organization has catapulted Pearson to such a degree globally that we were not there before, that now I see people, because I spend a lot of time, interestingly enough, in airports as well, and I'm able to compare and contrast airports around the world with respect to our airport here in Toronto. And while there are some things that we have to fit in, it's not a matter that we don't understand what we need to do. We have to fit those things in. It's more timing, it's collaboration with government. I moved a motion here some time ago that supported your transit effort around building a better network there, so we can create an opportunity for people going to their work, people in the surrounding area. We hear that there are private transits that are taking place, taking people to connect with the system, the transit system in the City of Toronto. So when I hear people, and I hear these conversations often when I'm in Pearson and elsewhere, they talk about coming to Toronto to make a connection to an international flight from varying parts of the U.S., and they say things like, I'd rather go to Toronto to connect versus going elsewhere. For me, it's a terrific sensibility and response to the great work that has been started at some time to address this fundamental travel opportunity, making it easier in connectivity globally for those who are traveling and so on. The airport's come a long way. The convenience, you have a health facility, Good Life is there. You've got all of these things that people want, because really, you're a mini city, right, in the city. And so people are there, they spend a lot of time, it's very convenient. So I think that we need to ensure that we continue to support obviously the work that you're doing there and be advocate, working with our residents to ensure that there's a balance in terms of some of the complaints we get, because I get them in my office as well about noise and what have you, and we get that. The fact that there's a great opportunity to go to 110 million passengers coming through, it's something that we as political leaders, and of course encouraging the Transport Canada and others and so on, to recognize that we need to build that the airport so that they'll come, because it's not a matter whether or not they want to come. They do want to come. We just don't have the capacity and so on. So I want to wish you continued success. And David, I know that you are continuing to work with, obviously, the board, and I'm sure that we have lots of work for you to do. So I hope you have no real plan to seriously consider leaving us anytime soon. And so I want to thank you very much for your leadership. And finally, Lori, you were one of us. Now you're one of them. It is important to recognize that there's life after politics, whether or not being a staffer or anything. But you have done such a remarkable job in terms of demonstrating your leadership there and the wisdom and the collaboration between your offices and our respective councillors' offices and so on. So I want to thank you all very much for that. And with that, I want to move receipt of the presentation. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, David. We'll talk soon. Thank you. All right, moving along to item EC 5.3. which is Toronto Paramedics Services Multi-Year Staffing and System Plan. I'd like to ask the Deputy Chief, or the acting chief, I'm changing his titles, acting chief, to come forward to speak. Mr. McCracken? And you brought your team with you, right? Thank you. Let me know when you're ready. Okay, get you connected. Yeah, that's fine. It's okay. We'll get there. This is a really good report, actually. It's a really good report. Can you sing?
Yep.
You can? Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Actually, before, just I could do a couple of intros if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah, please go ahead and do
Yeah, I
that.
have a few people with me, as you recognized. So,
Yes.
On my left is Vic Chawla. He's our Commander of Policy and Projects.
Yes.
On my right is Leo Sang. He's our Deputy Chief of Operations. Over to our right, we have our two other Deputy Chiefs, Rondell Hammesis, Deputy Chief Operational Support, Jennifer Shield, Deputy Chief of Education and Quality Services, and two other significant partners are from Local 416, Mike Merriman and Peter Schreier, who are key partners in the preparation of this report, and want to acknowledge.
Is that 416 in the back? I'm surprised you guys are in the back. I never see you guys in the back. Come to the front. Come on, so I can see you guys. Now, welcome to you. Thanks.
So just to start, this week is actually Paramedic Services Week in Canada. And from May 27th to June 2nd, and Mayor Tory proclaimed that recently for this week. And the theme for this year is celebrating successes. And I'd just like to make a shout out to all paramedics across the country and thank them for their service to the community. And I'd also like to thank this committee and council for your trust and confidence in our organization. Thank you so much. So this presentation is geared towards this multi-year staffing and systems plan that we were asked to put together. And a few key comments in terms of our service. And I think one of the most important components right now is we're in a growth industry. We're seeing a 4% growth in emergency call demand each year, and we've averaged that over the last 10 years. Another key piece here is we handle more than 40% of the call volume for the province. So Toronto is a hub in our paramedic world. And one of the most other important pieces that we're seeing a trend of treating and transporting more critically ill patients, which is a significant change over the last few years. And our strengths of our service is really around our clinical excellence of our paramedics. We have an accredited communications center. It's one of the very few in Canada that is accredited to the triage process, which is very important for our deployment model. And the last point is we have very good data, and we pride ourselves in making smart business decisions based on data. The next slide speaks to the direction that Council provided us through the budget process, so that's why we're here today. And it's the motions at that process really focused on coming up with a system plan and dealing with the ongoing pressures that our sector is experiencing. Next slide, Viv. Some of these pressures, as I mentioned earlier, regards to a growing and aging population has created quite a demand for EMS service. And in fact, in 2018 versus 2017, we saw a 5.4% increase. So it was above the 10-year average. The other component that we've also seen is we've seen an increase in our WCIB costs associated with PTSD claims, and we'll have more other comment on that a little further. And not only do our paramedics on the street freight the pressures, our communication center is also feeling the pressures, and that's part of our recommendations in the report to the Ministry of Health and recognizing that. The next slide just speaks to a visual presentation of our call demand. The step back line represents the average call volume from 2011 to 2018, so it gives you a really good indicator of the increase that we're seeing. And that 5.4 increase that I mentioned, 2018 over 17, that's about 18,000 more calls per year that we manage. As mentioned earlier, the drivers of emergency call demand are really geared in Toronto to an aging and growing population. So more than half of our patients in 2018 we transported were for patients over 55. The other important component to this is we expect to treat more than 11% of the city's population, and the city's population actually grows by 44,000 per year. And another component is people look to us for their access to healthcare in our vulnerable and marginalized communities. So we're a key player in access to healthcare. Next slide. This is the response time performance chart that I've used before in budget presentations. And the important piece here is if you look at the lines, the orange line, that's the paramedic staffing line. So as you can see, as call volume increased from 2013 to 2016, we had a council-approved staffing plan that followed that increase. For the last 3 years, we have not had an increase. And so now we're experiencing a change in our performance when it comes to response to critical patients. And in 2019, we expect to respond to 90% of the time in about 12 minutes, 6 seconds. That's our projected time right now, which is about a 15 to 16 second increase versus 2018. So we've been doing a lot of work around this aspect, and it's just not about adding resource. We've done a lot of work in terms of trying to address that. And on page 18 in Appendix B of the report, it outlines quite a bit of the detail. We've improved our scheduling of staff. We've implemented part-time staff. We've introduced community paramedicine in terms of mitigating strategy for calls. We've really focused on our in-hospital times to improve ambulance availability. We've introduced a multifunction station model to respond to the growth and efficiency piece. We really don't do a lot of non-emergency transports anymore, those interfacility transports, because we just don't have the capacity. And we've also continued to enhance our dispatch technology to become more efficient and effective at the triage and dispatch process. And the last thing that is in play right now is there's some changes in the Ambulance Act regulation that will help improve efficiencies. Those are treat and release programs as well as alternate destination strategies. And those are pending regulatory change with the government and the Ministry of Health. We've also focused on supporting our staff. We have a very strong psychological health and wellness program, and that's an important piece because it's focused on prevention, reduction of stigma, timely intervention, post-incident support, and increased available resources. And I'll talk a little bit that further in terms of the outcomes of the WSIB pressures. The other component that I'd like to mention is our improved staff engagement. We've done a lot of work on engaging our partners in labor, in improving working conditions, and we value their input, and we've done numerous things as outlined in the slide to engage them in being part of our decision making. The next slide speaks to the WSIB lost hours. This is not something that is new to our industry. In fact, in 2011, the Alberta Health System, Alberta Health Services, they introduced the legislation that we did in 2016, and they saw a 5-year increase in their costs. And we're at year 3. So our costs have actually tripled over the last 3 years when it comes to WSIB compensation. And it's very important that we've underestimated in Ontario the impact of the sector, and we have to catch up a little bit on our process, especially when it comes to the budget. The length of absence of each employee and the resources required to get them back to work is very unique to the individual, so it's very prescriptive in terms of that time frame. Currently, we have approximately 60 staff out of our 1,200 that are off on WSIB work-related stress injuries. Next slide. Time on task and ambulance availability is a theme that you're going to see in our report in the pages 9 through 12 of the report. And this graph that I have on the screen is the total length of time to service an emergency call. And you'll see that this time on task has gone up 37% over the last, since 2011. And this is really geared towards ambulance availability because the ambulance availability is dependent on the time it takes to service a call and the number of emergency calls. So as time on task increases, ambulance availability will drop, and that also increases the pressure on paramedics with their workload. Time on task can be further broken down, and I'll talk a little bit on the next slide about ambulance offload times. So the key piece to this chart is you can see that there's 4 different segments on ambulance time on task. En route to call, at scene of call, en route to hospital, and in hospital. So ambulance travel times actually in the past, since 2011, they've increased. So the time to travel is, as you well are aware, specialty centers for critical patients takes us time to get to those locations. Roads, congestion, construction, all impacts, and so does the weather. So those times have gradually increased. At scene times have also gone up, but also that's actually a reflection on the paramedic scope of practice increasing. So all paramedics now complete 12-lead ECG rhythm analysis, and they've also increased their scope when it comes to pain management. So those things have added to the time on task. As well as en route to hospital time, again referring to critical patients, we transport critical patients to specialty centers, so that will take a little bit longer because some of them they won't be going to the closest hospital. They'll actually be going to a specialty hospital where intervention will happen sooner for those patients. And the last comment I make is focused on in-hospital times. So you can see I've highlighted 2014 in red. In 2013, 2014, both the in-hospital time and the en route to call time jumped significantly. And when we did our deep dive and an analysis of that, the biggest impact was the in-hospital time with regards to transfer of care, pre-transfer of care time. So when the hospital slows down on transfer of care, it has a real combination of impact on us, because it takes the paramedics off the street, and those that are available on the street will now have to travel further distances. So that's where you see that combination of time at the in-hospital en route to call has jumped. And the key piece there is when there's less ambulances, they have to travel further to a call. And when you add the component of we do over 300,000 calls, a few minutes to a call makes a big difference when you do the math. It's not all bad news. And when it comes to offload times, we've had significant work with the hospitals, and we have multiple variety of mechanisms and working groups. And the key point there is that we've reduced our 3-hour offload delays by more than 44% during this period of time. You remember back in the early 2000s, we were on offload day for 6 to 8 hours quite frequently. A communication center, I mentioned earlier that our accredited center, which is 100% funded by the province, is also experiencing a lot of pressures, and they have not seen any significance. So we have been, since 2013, we haven't added any resource. So the report outlines is on page 12 to 13, the business case that we'll be submitting to the ministry, and that is something that will be an important component to our dispatch and deploy our resources. So my next slide speaks to the growing population as mentioned earlier, but when you look at the report speaks to on page 14 to 15, it actually speaks to the comparison of city population versus our calls, emergency calls per capita, and it's outpacing that, which is a real problem for us in terms of when you look at the growth that we're experiencing. Again, the component that really impacts us in terms of this volume is we get into the challenges of having to spend more money on overtime to support the staffing on the street. And that's a very important component because we have a part-time classification that we use to help us with our paid absences, but we're now into the point with emergency call demand so high that we're having to use overtime to supplement staffing on the street. There's no doubt that it also plays over to our operational support side. That's why this report is a systems plan, and you'll see components that line up with that in terms of what we're asking for. So the methodology that we use to determine how many paramedics that we need, I'm going to walk you through the process. So the first piece talks to the number of calls we do in 2018 and the % increase in call volume that we see on a 10-year average. So when you do the math, it comes out that we expect to do 13,200 more calls this year. Next slide. So each call in 2018, this is an important aspect, is that each call took 127 minutes to complete. And that's 90% of the time, so it's a fairly accurate measure. So when we take that and how many new hours do we need to meet the demand, it's simply a calculation of as times the number of calls times the time to come up with the number of hours additionally that we need for 2019. And that's over 27,000 hours. So how many ambulances are required to support that 27,000 plus hours? One ambulance produces 8,760 hours. and we simply divide that into the 27, and we come up with 3.2 ambulances. And how many paramedics do you need to staff an ambulance? 24, 365? It takes 18 paramedics to staff one truck 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So how many paramedics does it take to staff the 3.2? Well, we come up with 57 paramedic FTEs. So that's the basis of our staffing methodology for the request. And it's important to see that component because it hasn't been published that way before in terms of the industry. So when we look at the recommendation that the report provides, I think this will change a little bit now with the recent announcement. But the bottom line is we were asked to put together a system plan over the next 5 years. And the key piece for this report is that each year at budget time, we will come back with the ask because it's calculated on the previous year's actuals. So it is fluid and dynamic in that way, and it's a very important component of understanding how our sector works. It's a growth sector. There's no way around that component. And we've also made the assumption that we'll be working on a 50-50 funding allotment for land ambulance with the province. So that's the presentation, Deputy Mayor, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Acting Chief. We are going to Councillor Grimes. Question, Councillor Grimes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, just looking at the time on task there, en route to call looks pretty consistent since 11. At the scene, it's gone up since 11. Like, you're not much you can do on the scene, right? I mean, that's kind of depending on the incident, right? But that's, why would that have gone up since 2011 to 2018? Is it just numbered?
The on-scene time? The paramedic skill set has increased. So the paramedics actually, remember, this is a provincial governed program. So paramedic care is clinically based, and as clinical evidence suggests new interventions or new things that paramedics can do, we introduce them. So a good example is 12-lead ECG rhythm interpretation. So certain types of heart attacks, those are the STEMIs, they go to specific centers where they can actually put a stent into the patient's heart. So every paramedic in Toronto has that ability to analyze that type of patient with chest pain or whatever and can transport them directly to that site. So it takes a little more time on scene to actually do that process, but the time gained is in the actual transport to the facility to save their life. Right. Another aspect of that is the analgesia. We provide a lot of pain management for folks because they have demonstrated that early management of pain reduces the hospital length of stay.
Yeah. And I know I've asked you this before, and I just kind of asked you offline, in hospital time, and I talk from experience on this, but that's gone way up. But you were working on that, and you expect to make some strides on in hospital, having the paramedics waiting in the hallways?
Yeah, we have numerous strategies for that. So the first one is the province supports an offload nurse program, and that's where there's dedicated nurses for us to transfer care of our patients straight to them in the hospital. The other component is we also have what's called a working group that has every emergency chief in the hospitals that we meet quarterly, and they get a report card on their performance. So our data is very important. So they know the transfer of care times that their emergency has in comparison to the other emergency departments. And the other key piece is also distribution. So distribution in terms of how we distribute patients across the city is extremely important because we don't want to clump one hospital geographically. So we have business rules in a computer application that all the hospitals have agreed to that provide destination decisions for paramedics to transport so that we avoid the clumping. And that's why you've seen the long offload delays reduce significantly. But remember, the offload pressures in the hospital, it's a healthcare issue and it's a flow issue throughout the hospital based on the aging population.
And going to the call demand, emergency call demand increase, I see that being a population thing, but just as we talk about people walking to emergency, I know we got the e-health now ads on, trying to get people to go online before you walk into a hospital. When the 911 call comes into 911, how do they know if we have to send an ambulance or not? I mean, how do you need an ambulance, or does this automatically go on a 911 call? Like it was a car fire, the person's out of the car, not near the car, does an ambulance have to respond? How do you have a lot of data, I understand, but.
Yeah, so the regulations are quite prescriptive. So if you place a call to 911 and it becomes to our center because there could be a medical need, we're obligated under the regulation to dispatch an ambulance. However, we've been working with the province on updating the regulation so that there'll be alternate methods of being able to triage those cases much more specific. Remember, it's medical risk. So that one call that we get on the highway, that one unique incident, it may have 7 or 8 calls that are also associated with that one. They could be driving down. So we have to answer every one of those calls to make sure that we don't have another patient or another piece. So it's really about medical risk and what's best for the patient. But we're getting closer to providing alternate choices for patients. We do that now. We do send patients to telehealth, but they go through that risk-based assessment and making sure there's not a life-threatening condition. So we are working on that. That's the future.
Great, thanks very much. And I told you I had the concierge service myself a couple weeks ago, and I paid my $45, just so it's in the mail.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grimes. Councillor Carroll?
Just a quick question about getting there on the staffing vis-a-vis the announcement, because it looks like we are still in the cost-sharing business. I'm wondering if there's an argument to be made, or if it ever has been made, given the provincial strategy the government passed to help people age at home, means that we are going to possibly save on long-term care facilities, possibly save on hospitals, but that actually is more pressure for you. From your age statistics mean that you may stay home, but you may, like my dad, use an ambulance 5 times in 1 year because you're 90. Although he's not at home anymore. But that is the cost of an age-at-home government policy. Can we use that argument to try and cost share, load up those additional positions?
We do that now, Councillor.
So that has already been.
Yeah, we have a community paramedicine program that the LHINs have been funding. Excuse me. And we actually visit high-frequent users of VMS on a regular basis. And that program has helped reduce the number of calls back from those folks.
Yeah.
So the program has been out there. We need to expand it a little bit more. The other expansion that the province is moving forward on the regulatory side is palliative care.
Right.
So we get a palliative care call where somebody's experiencing the death and dying component of it. We're obligated to transport. And we feel, and there's programs that are out across the country now, that we can help support those people at home and not have a transport to the ED. So we're getting there slowly.
So it's not a matter of this program does certain things, but we just need FTEs. You want to actually have FTEs and actually expand them within that program.
A little bit of that, yeah. It's a combination of things.
Yeah, I think a combination, because the program can only be as successful as the family wants to be, I guess.
And the LHIN, and understanding how the Ontario health teams are going to interplay with that is another component that we're still learning. The other system with the LHINs was effective in helping us understand what was out there in terms of that population base.
Yeah.
And we're trying to establish some registries so we know what that is across the city.
Right.
Because if we have that information in the communication center, we can provide that information to the paramedic on the way to the call. So they'll have that information.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. Anyone else? Question? Okay. Just a few from me. In your presentation, you talk a little bit about the increase in strokes and traumas, and the page doesn't have a page number. Is it number 4? Okay. I don't see number 4 on my page, but maybe it's hidden somewhere. Gun violence with respect to that. Now, is that reflected in trauma then in terms of the increase?
It's a combination of really critical medically ill patients, which is the stroke, heart attack, yes, trauma. There's also some of the opioid overdose patients in there. So this year alone, in April, we saw more patients from opioid overdoses. I believe the number jumped from 35 in 2018 to 68 from January in the first quarter of this year. So we're seeing more of those types of patients to contribute. But the trauma component in terms of the city, large metropolitan city, we see quite a bit of that. And we're very successful at getting those folks to critical to the critical interventions that they need. And I believe Toronto is recognized as one of the top 3 in North America when it comes to survival rates.
Right, so as it relates to dollar sums for the pressures for 2019, what's that figure?
So the recent announcement in terms of the cut was $3.85 million.
Right.
So that impacted our ability to provide additional resource this year, pending another program that the government is funding.
But you were aware of the announcement that was just made
Yes.
5 minutes ago?
Yes. which is
So
great.
less pressure on
Yep.
you at the moment.
I should be able to manage that within our current budget.
But notwithstanding that fact, you still have the data that suggests what the call demands are, delay, and the impact of that if in fact we don't proceed in a timely fashion as it relates to this report that really seeks to put in place a systematic order in terms of an annualized basis, what the investment requirements are and what that impact is in terms of the number of people that you bring into the system to relieve the overall pressure and stress and so on the team now.
That's exactly.
Right. And so you also talked a little bit about the WSIB. You have 60 staff that's actually off at any one time, or is it the 60 staff that's off now?
That's currently
as it relates?
That's currently off right now.
Right. And so what has been is that the highest level of staffing that's been off on WSIB?
Related to stress, yes. We've never had this number. This number
Right.
is high.
And how do you deal with the people who are off? What's the mechanism? Are there, I'm assuming if you could explain that to me so I have a better understanding.
So under the legislation, the WSIB will provide them benefits.
Yes.
So the key piece for us is to make sure that they access those clinical specialists for this care. And that is a bit of a challenge. So because of the increase in the numbers, the clinical side of the psychological support is a bit less than adequate. So there's a capacity issue now. So we've really streamlined and tried to get these people to care as quickly as possible, because as soon as you get them to care, the sooner they come back to work. The longer it takes for them to get back.
Now, you introduced, when you were making introduction of your senior team, you also talked about 416, which is the union that represents the workers and the membership group. So tell me about that relationship, how you've all worked together to address this fundamental problem that's in the paramedic services.
So 416, we've introduced with 416 a number of working groups. So working groups are very important because we hear the input from the staff. So the working groups are focused on new shift schedules. We have return to work strategies that involve 416, which are really important. We work with them on end of shift overtime as well as meal break ideas and processes. They're involved in our health and safety to identify new equipment. They're also involved in a lot of our activities on a regular go-forward basis. We've done breakfast meetings with staff to get input. We provide quarterly newsletters to staff as well as an annual report. So they're a key stakeholder in our business.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. To speak. Okay, Councilor Grubbs? Good. Okay. So thank you for your presentation. We're obviously going to move this item. I'm really pleased that as you spoke, the announcement essentially was being made. I want to certainly thank the Premier for a conscious effort to recognize the need for us to have some dialogue, which we've been calling for, the Mayor and others and members around the province of the political family. And so I'm buoyed by the fact that the $3.85 million that you needed to ensure that service level cuts were not going to be implemented for 2019 is not required. And so we know that there is a tremendous need for the service. You talk about in your report the aging population that exists within the context of our city. You've indicated that 40% of the call volume that is done by your organization, that's of the province, right? and because this is the big city here. And you talk, which I made notes of this because this is really important to me. You talk about business decisions are made based on data analysis and data collection, and you were very clear in terms of how you will arrive at the staffing requirement. I'm very happy to see that because it makes sense for us to have a long-term staffing requirement plan that helps us as part of the budgetary process, as part of recognizing that when we as politicians talk to our community, that we actually have a plan to respond to their needs, because the critical thing is that when you need the service, you want to make sure it's there. You don't want to worry about the money, you don't want to worry about the staffing, and you want to ensure when a staff person comes to help you that they're not under great degree of duress or stress themselves trying to help the public because of the service that is required and so on. So I'm really happy that we're able to look at this. We know through your report, you're talking about the continued increase of the 4% increase with respect to, the emergency calls. And one of those are a mom calling or a parent calling about a child who is having some type of medical emergency and there's a need for response. In our society, we can ill afford not to provide the adequate services to ensure that the residents are given the appropriate care that's needed. And I think that's what you're trying to do, Acting Chief, to ensure through you and your team and the collaboration with 416, to ensure that the service level is not withdrawn, it's not lesser than what is expected based on the numbers and based on the calls and so on. So I'm hopeful that going forward, we're going to be able to work with the province and the collaboration that's necessary to provide the level of service to our citizens, because there's an expectation that the level of service should be there at all times, and we ought not to simply dial it down to dollars and cents at the expense of good health and measures to respond to emergency calls and so on. So I want to thank you for your presentation and thank you for your report. With that, members, I could move the item. All those in favor? Sorry. No, we're good. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're good. Pardon? So all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, members, our next item is timed item is EC 5.4, but I've been asked by staff if we could deal with EC 5.6 because the staff members have to attend, I guess, another matter, and it should be quick. Pardon? Yes, yeah, no. I don't see Councillor Ford here. Okay. Okay, so I don't see Councillor Ford here, so Quebec. Well, just okay. Well, can we just recess for 5 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay, we'll just recess for 5 minutes so we can deal with that. Okay, so just have a 5-minute recess. Okay. What's that? Is that loud enough? Okay, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to recess for 5 minutes. So 10 after. You good? Councillor Ford, while you were out of the room, we had decided to deal with EC 5.6. His staff have got to go elsewhere. So we're just going to vary the agenda quickly. So we are going to just move the motion to vary the agenda to deal with EC 5.6 instead of EC 5.4, which is supporting survivors on human trafficking. And so we'll deal with then, once members approve this, the pilot skate exchange program and skate lending by city-operated rinks and so on. Okay, so all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, so we're on that item. Councillor Ford, questions?
To speak.
Just to speak?
Yes.
Okay. Just 1 second. Does anyone else have questions on this item? Okay, fair enough. Okay, Councillor Ford, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And to be very brief, all I want to do with this item is thank staff for their continued work on this particularly. I know a couple years ago, or it could be last year, years are flying by. At one point, I know working with actually Councillor Fletcher, because I know Councillor Fletcher also very much cared about this, is looking at opportunities to connect different recreation opportunities in the city, and this particular being hockey. And I think we all, I think, know and appreciate in this room the cost of hockey, and skating in particular being an expensive sport. So what we endeavored to do was to connect to communities on a skate exchange program, which from my understanding, went very well. And moving forward, having staff's commitment for this next winter as well is very reassuring and great. So I look forward to the program happening again this year, and partnering with some of our big stakeholders in the community and our city to have this happen once again. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Ford. Any further speakers? Seeing none, all those in favor? Oppose? Okay, that's carried. The items approved. All right, so we are now moving to speakers on supporting survivors of human trafficking. I have the first speaker is, and I'm hoping that I can pronounce his name properly, but it looks like Jicha Satrayandian from FCJ Refugee Center, and is also Loli Rico. Is that yourself, ma'am, or is Loli? Okay, so you're both together, and you're a DJ. So, okay. Okay, great. Are you speaking independently or together? You're speaking together. So okay, fair enough. I will then start your time, and welcome. Just so that it's really clear, you have, so between the two of you, you really have 10 minutes, right? And so you can exercise that and utilize your full 10 minutes. There's a clock to your left. It will show when we arrive at the 10 minutes. You don't have to use a 10 if you don't need to, but you're welcome to do that. When you are through, and this is for everyone that's here, this is your first time here, I just want to make sure we go through run of show, if it will. When you're through speaking at the 10-minute mark, we will stop, and then we will ask members of the committee, if there are any visiting councillors who may come to us, if they wish to ask you questions. It's their prerogative to ask you questions or not, and if they do, they will also have 5 minutes to ask you questions, and you can respond. Unfortunately, you're not allowed to ask them questions. They're the ones who are able to ask you questions, and you respond as best as you can and as you think is appropriate. So welcome very much to this committee, and I will, if you are ready to go, I will then start your time. And again, as I said, I direct your attention to the left where the timer is. It says all zeros now, but it will be at 10 when we will ask you to conclude, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for letting us to come and present. And I want to speak a little bit of who we are. The FCJ Refugee Center, we are a non-profit organization that we have 28 years working with refugees, but also with the people who are at risk due to their immigration status. And we are here because we have a program that is related to anti-human trafficking. And we have been seeing victims of human trafficking since 2002, and we have seeing cases either on the sexual exploitation or labor exploitation. Since then, we have been very involved in the, when was the first, and the City of Toronto passed the motion on counter human trafficking. And one of the things that we have been doing is that we found with other 50 organizations a network, which is the Toronto Counter Human Trafficking Network. And in that, what we have been doing is try to work together on training. We were doing training, especially with the municipality license, and doing a training on what is awareness on human trafficking. And on that note, we have been working in the last year in all Ontario, the FCJ, we have been seeing more than 100 people that have been victims of human trafficking, mainly of them labor exploitation. We had more than 15 cases that have been on labor exploitation here in the City of Toronto. And what we want to come and talk to you is about the recommendations. In the recommendations, you are talking about the outreach model, which is a need to do outreach. But in the outreach model, we are, and even though say that is in consultation with the stakeholders, we are looking that the outreach model has to focus on, with more leading on the civil society, remove the enforcement on in the outreach model. And one of the challenges that we are seeing is that we know that the city staff has to go and do inspections, and at the moment that person sees the person of the city staff as an authority. What we are recommending is that the outreach model has to do city staff and the civil society, organizations that we have the expertise on working with human trafficking. And the other is that I want to bring that the outreach model is focused on sexual exploitation, which is very limited what they are doing with the city. Labor exploitation is happening in the city, and we are looking that the outreach model has to do it on the labor. Just to tell you, we saw 15 people during this year in my organization, that we are a grassroots organization, without awareness. We need to start bringing the awareness on labor exploitation in the city. To go to the hotels, but not just to look that there is someone sexually exploiting the hotels. What is happening with the people that is cleaning hotel? They are very bad paid. To go to nail salons, in the services, most of the cases that we have, they're coming people that they have been in the services, in the food, in the restaurants, and in that case, we need to do that awareness. I wanna also, my colleague Jaitra is going to talk on the holistic approach, but I wanna, because I'm seeing the time, I wanna also to bring about the online training that is going to be, has to be that online training on the tips and to look on what is the situation of trafficking on the labor. And one of the elements is not just, and I reinforce to you, because we have been doing and we have materials that we give it to the workers, is that civil society has to be the one doing the outreach and to support, with the support of the city, because when the city goes to the places, they already say they don't feel comfortable to speak up because they see them as authority. The other is that the model has to also to comply with the other motions that the city has. Access without fear. Many of the workers are people without status. And in that case, in the online, training has to be the component of immigration and also the component to identify with the person in the tips, not to look at in the enforcement. That's what I'm really pushing to you. The other is that I want to pass my 5 minutes finish to my colleague, Jaitra.
Thank you.
Thank you again for allowing us to speak. I'd like to speak on holistic services. Something I appreciate reading in the report is a mention on immigration status, and that many without status have difficulty accessing services because of fear, and that is a big reality. And so we want to continue, or we want to ensure that the city continues to maintain the sanctuary city policy and really put it into practice. And with that regard, when speaking about holistic services, to ensure that immigration is a key component of one of those services. In that regard, we also want to bring in international cases. We work with many migrant workers who come here to work, who end up somehow falling out of status and also end up being in a situation of labor trafficking. But with that regard, we have been helping those without immigration status obtain a temporary resident permit from immigration, which allows them to have some form of temporary status while trying to navigate this whole process. But in that regard, even though they do have a temporary resident permit, they have difficulty accessing services like housing. So housing allowances, Ontario Works. And other places like Windsor, an individual who has a temporary resident permit is able to access Ontario Works. But for us, what we've been seeing is that with our clients who have been trafficked, who have been successfully able to obtain a temporary resident permit, are having difficulty getting Ontario Works. And that social assistance is incredibly important for those who have been, for example, who have been trafficked, who have been in a labor trafficking situation, who have had their money controlled by the trafficker, and who are in need of a lot of support. And we want to ensure that when these supports are being provided, and also that when the community-based support team is doing their work in raising awareness and providing supports and referrals, that they utilize an intersectional lens when doing so, because survivors of human trafficking are very diverse, and it's really important that lens is used when supporting them.
And just to finish with us is that you have already a network that you can come and we can work together and we can prepare that outreach model. When our network, we did a response model when we started in 2013, and also we were involved in the elaboration of the helpline that was City Toronto, now is provincial. And in that case, we are here to work, and also if you can focus on the labor as well.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions for our presenters? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Okay, our next speaker is Jenny Duffy, Maggie's Toronto Sex Workers Action Project. Ms. Duffy. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let me know when you're ready and I'll press the button to start your time. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm ready.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to City Council members and to staff for having me here today. My name is Jenny Duffy, and I am from Maggie's Toronto Sex Workers Action Project. For those of you who may not be familiar with our program, we are a community-based organization, and our focus is on delivering support and harm reduction supplies to sex working populations. So we are the oldest sex worker run organization in Canada, and we also advocate for the safety and dignity of sex workers. So I want to start by acknowledging the great job that the city staff have done in creating a report that appropriately draws the distinction between sex work and human trafficking. This report also captures the harmful implications that anti-trafficking initiatives involving increased surveillance and attempts to rescue sex workers have on sex working populations, and particularly racialized workers who, due to stereotypes, are subject to questioning, raids, and deportation. As an organization, so Maggie's, that advocates for the safety and dignity of sex workers, we would be pleased to continue working with city staff to help that the distinction between sex working and human trafficking, which the city so well articulated in the report, we would like to help them to be able to integrate that into their strategy program so that that distinction is then reflected in their approach to communities. So we would do this through consultation, and we would help develop a strategy that effectively offers support to human trafficking victims while not compromising the safety and security of sex working populations who, as a result of the industry being criminalized, stigmatized, are already marginalized. So in other words, we would like to help the city create an approach that reaches their target audience, which is human trafficking victims, rather than catching sex work populations all in that approach instead. So right now, the city staff's recommendations proposes an outreach into workplaces in which people may be at risk of trafficking. So our concern is the adverse effect that an authority figure, such as city staff, or even someone who's simply going into workplaces looking for human trafficking, the adverse effects that poses on workers, including trafficking victims who may be placed in further jeopardy as a result of being questioned and as a result of someone's presence looking and searching them out. So the purpose of the city's report is to provide support to human trafficking. However, due to the criminalized and stigmatized position of sex work, someone coming in to check in on workers in their workplaces, it often causes workers to feel afraid that they're going to be treated like criminals, because those who are being trafficked in the sex industry, they're still working in a criminalized industry. So it's quite scary when someone comes in and asks questions. And even, say for a sex worker, someone comes to you and asks, "Are you okay? Is someone making you do this?" While that may sound like a nice, helpful question, that actually adds to the stigma, and it actually discourages workers from accessing services. So it ends up having the opposite of what this strategy is aiming to do, which is encouraging vulnerable populations to access services. So for these reasons, Maggie supports a motion that we submitted, and it's a motion that Butterfly also submitted, where we are suggesting amendments that rather than outreach into workplaces, the city should provide outreach to community organizations and in consultation with sex workers, migrant workers, and trafficking survivors, and that they should support those community organizations that already have trusting relationships with vulnerable populations to be able to provide those supports. And the city is already funding these initiatives. At Maggie's, we have a peer outreach project. The city is funding that. We have built relationships with vulnerable communities, and we're in a great position to provide these relevant supports. So that's why, just to finish, we are recommending outreach to community organizations rather than the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have questions of you. I see visiting member Councilor Wong-Tam. No? Okay, so we will start with committee member. She apparently doesn't have questions. Councilor Carroll?
Yes, hi. Thanks for your deputation and printing out your motion, because that helps. But I have some questions about it. Are you not concerned that if we're not a part of the outreach, that you still have a situation where your peer workers, organizations like yourself, have an understanding, but if we're not sending our city workers out to be part of the outreach, we don't end up with a team that truly embraces the approach that you want us to take, because they haven't got that exposure. How do we address that if we're not in the outreach?
I think that's a completely reasonable concern, and that's why we're recommending the consultation piece, that sex work organizations, human trafficking survivors, migrant workers would be working with city staff in a more collaborative approach. And this collaborative approach would be about, okay, how do we help human trafficking victims without harming sex workers? So it's not that the city staff would be out of the picture, but it wouldn't be a city staff person who's doing the outreach into workplaces. But it could look like city staff going to community organizations with resources for them. Does that answer your question?
It answers the questions. I'm not sure I'm all the way there yet.
Okay, yeah.
May I ask some more? I want to ask a question. it touches on your deputation, but I think I need to hear some more on this. The issue of the Toronto Police Service having their own unit, which is really, today's focus is on how we help survivors, so we're not talking about them a lot. But you did speak of integration between your agencies and us. I'm concerned, and I've spoken to staff, about there's no integration, therefore a clear, an assurance for me that we're all on the right track. There's no integration between our planning and training and the police's planning and training, such as what I saw in the Montreal model when I visited it. So is your organization confident when they say they now have a human trafficking unit and they're training on it in their annual training? Do they access your organization so that they have a survivor component to their training? Are they working with you, the Toronto Police Service?
We would totally welcome them to work with us. We have had meetings before. Those meetings were more about by law enforcement, though.
Yeah.
But we would welcome meetings with the Toronto Police Service.
But they're not having them now. They're not asking.
They're not asking now, but it is certainly something that we are open to because you're right. It's important that these services are integrated and that we're on the same page.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. Any further questions of the presenter? Okay, I see none. Thank you very much for your presentation, ma'am. Our next speaker is Emily Vandermeulen, Ryerson University. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let me know when you're ready, ma'am.
I'm ready.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Your time is on.
So my name is Emily Vandermeulen, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Criminology at Ryerson. I've been studying sex work and human trafficking for just about 15 years now. I've conducted a number of empirical studies on the topic, including research that has engaged migrant sex workers, Indigenous sex workers, drug-using sex workers who are in prison, street-based workers, indoor workers, outdoor workers, escorts, dancers, and so on. I also conduct research in the areas of surveillance studies, drug policy, and prisons. So I want to use my 5 minutes, or what's remaining of them, to share a couple of thoughts, echoing a little bit of what was just presented from Maggie's, on how the city can best support people who are experiencing violence, coercion, or exploitative conditions in the sex industry. So the first thing the city needs to do, I would suggest, is to support the already ongoing activities of sex worker-run organizations. So it's important to stress here that these organizations should be made up of current sex workers, sex workers or people who have worked in the industry decades or years ago, who now may be quite removed from the current realities of what's actually happening in the industry. So this was also stated in the Maggie's presentation that these organizations are best positioned to eradicate harmful, abusive, or exploitative conditions because they are people who are themselves working within the industry and can identify these exact conditions. So this should not then be a city-determined specialized support team or anti-trafficking police forces. It really needs to be people who have insider knowledge, which sex workers do, and can actually then conduct really effective outreach strategies and programs where non-sex workers, especially police or city personnel, would not be welcomed. There's a level of trust and mutuality that creates a comfortable environment for other sex workers to be able to disclose if they're in a problematic or precarious situation. I see from one of the appendices in the city report that the city has indeed provided resources to organizations like Butterfly and Maggie's, and certainly this type of resource support should continue. That's quite valuable and I think very important. Next, the city also needs to develop a very clear labor rights framework and support the full decriminalization of the sex industry. Sex workers have long argued, and research has certainly demonstrated, that the best way to address exploitative labor conditions, unscrupulous bosses or managers, predators who may be posing as clients, and other types of problematic experiences within the sex industry is to adopt a labor relations and employment standards framework. So the most successful example of this has been found in New Zealand, which decriminalized sex work back in 2003. There's still much room for improvement even within this decriminalized context, but what New Zealand did was passed a federal law that, quote, promotes the welfare and occupational health and safety of sex workers, end quote. So rather than drawing on a criminal law framework and mechanisms like we do here in Canada, the federal government in New Zealand adopted a labor framework and actively worked with the country's national sex worker rights organizations to develop employment and public health policies that would benefit sex workers and their clients. That's been really important. In the decade and a half since decriminalization has happened in New Zealand, sex workers there have reported increased occupational benefits and increased control over their work. These include improvements to their safety and in their relationships with police officers, a greater ability to demand condom usage with clients, lower rates of sexually transmitted infections, and better access to sexual health services. So if it followed this approach, the City of Toronto would also be reinforcing and reinvigorating its access without fear policy, instead of constantly trying to unsuccessfully address problematic conditions through over-policing and under-protection of marginalized communities under the guise of anti-trafficking. So we now have decades of scholarly research that shows anti-trafficking policy and programming, especially those that focus exclusively on the sex trade, which is what the city report does. It focuses exclusively on the sex trade, causes considerable more harm than help to the very people who are meant to be supported. So this reality, right, that is that anti-trafficking approaches are in fact harmful, has been borne out in the literature and in practice time and time again. There's no question about it. Even quite well-meaning anti-trafficking programming often comes with a host of unintended problematic consequences. We know this. So why not look to best practice approaches like supporting sex worker organizations to continue the important work they're doing, ensuring labor rights and protections are afforded to all workers, but certainly especially those who might be experiencing problematic or precarious conditions, and complete decriminalization of the industry so that when and if people need or want state intervention or protection, they can get that support without the fear of criminal sanctions towards themselves, their coworkers, their clients,
5
or their
minutes,
loved
ma'am.
ones. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic, right on time. Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, just a quick question. In the work on the issue at Ryerson, have you delved deeply into the police approach? Because this report, while it deals with survivors, as I said before, we tend to be completely separate there. And there was a motion years ago moved here under a different chair about the city completely supporting the decrim model that never really came back to my memory. So, because I think it was close to election time when it was moved, and sometimes those things just sort of slide away. So I'm wondering. At that time, we were moving towards our approach needs to integrate with the Toronto Police Services approach, so that we do know, as Jenny was saying, that we're all on the same page with our training and their training. Did Ryerson delve deeply into the police approach, city to city?
So I have not conducted direct research on the police approach to the specific, their anti-trafficking efforts, so I can't speak to that directly.
Okay.
I was aware too, as well, that the City of Toronto did pass a motion to support decriminalization of sex work. I've actually never even seen the actual text of that motion. It seems to have been hard to come by, but if City Council was actually able to find that motion and to reinstate its support of full decriminalization, I think that would be a tremendous advocacy tool to actually helping to stop and to be able to implement labor rights and protections.
It is, I think, almost 10 years ago. When we moved it, it was on the way to the 2010 election. So I'll do some hunting.
Be great to
Thank
find
you.
that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. Ms. Willen, do you have a copy of your presentation that you'd like to submit to the clerk, or could you send it to us electronically?
I haven't, but I can if you'd like.
Yeah, it would be helpful, because I think all of this material could be brought in for consideration with the work that our staff will be doing ongoing. Okay, thank you very much. I know that the clerk member will come to you in a moment. Eileen Lam, Butterfly Asian and Migrant Sex Workers Support Network. Ms. Lam? Thank you.
Thank you.
You'll have 5 minutes. Please let me know when you're ready. I just also want to remind members who are here to speak, we do have a timed item at 12. So we may step this item down in order to accommodate that time item. It's a timed item. So I just wanted to let you know, but we will proceed to allow you the time allotted to allow you to speak and to give your presentation. You may begin.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Elaine Lam, the Executive Director of Butterfly, which is an Asian and migrant sex worker support network organized by and for sex worker community. We have contacted more than 2,000 workers in last 5 years. We are the defender of safety and human rights of the sex worker. We are working with the community to stop violence, exploitation, including trafficking. We are the expert on the policy. We know what is helpful and what is harmful. So we are open to working with city to develop the strategy, how to protect the workers. I would really highly appreciate the effort of the staff to listen to the voices when they prepare the report. And their highlight of importance of differentiate sex work and trafficking, that is very important, that acknowledge it will increase the surveillance, stigmatization, and criminalization of sex work. The policy also should not increase vulnerability of the sex worker. So in last few years, we have more than 25 migrant sex workers being arrested and detained and deported under the anti-trafficking initiative. So we really want to stop the anti-trafficking initiative, become the anti-migrant and anti-sex work policy. Today, we are proposing the few small change, so that is proposed by Maggie also, so that we really hope that to work with city to have the strategies to better support the community. So we suggest that city should not only focus the help to the sex worker, but also other migrants. One of the workers told us that before I work in this business, I work 12 hours per day and I have only get like 7 hours per hour in a factory. Now I have better income. I'm not traffic victim. I don't want to have my privacy being infringed. I don't want to get any trouble. No matter they are friendly or not, I don't want city staff or law enforcement come to my place. Just like you don't want the police knock your door and to ask you whether you're abused by your husband or like your partner, so that we really want to see there is some way that we can address the issue. Of course, it is important to consider how to reach out the community that are at risk of trafficking. As what Maggie mentioned, there is already a lot of community organizations like Maggie's, Butterfly, and also Workers' Action Center and CCNCTO. They already build a trust relationship with the community. Here is the flyer, so the how to help the worker help themselves. So instead of having the staff to come to the workplace, we can be more effective how to work with the organization, develop the model, because the city really want the information and really want the people get help if they want. So how we can develop the model to address that. And then so that we also need to know that how to have the anti-discrimination policy against the sex worker, that is very important. So that we are also suggesting like to involve people, equity, human rights division in this whole anti-trafficking policy to make sure that it's anti-racist and make sure all the measure in non-discrimination. So we also want the city continues to uphold the access without fear policy, make all the people without document also can access like the city support. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Carroll.
Yes, and thank you, Elaine, because I think you just got to the heart of the matter. That is a real stumbling block in the approach. The reason I keep asking the questions about police is that's sort of my background, is the discussion we had back when I was on the police board. And when we took a police officer with us to view the Montreal model that was a little more integrated than this, that was a big learning for them, was that you could be a migrant person and you could choose sex work. Mm-hmm. And so they had them speak to survivors, but they also had them speak to sex workers. Mm-hmm. We're not survivors, it's a choice. Yeah. And also had them speak to outside the stereotype and racial bias that surrounds this. So there were 3 different scenarios, and each of them was eye-opening to them. But the one that you mentioned is really important here. So I would ask this question of Butterfly. Has Butterfly ever been approached by the Toronto Police Service to help them with their training nodule and training approach?
No, so that we have been trying to contact the like anti-trafficking team. So, but they said that like sex work is not trafficking. So that like because we have a woman being murdered, we are trying to contact them so that we can like get the contact, and we are not being like involved in any training. So that we would love to have like involved in this kind of training to make them to have like the sex work sensitive and differentiate sex work and trafficking. Yeah.
So the people developing their training, and we've got to avoid this in our city training, which is the subject of this report, is there's this sensitivity around No, we're not talking about sex work, we're talking about trafficking, which is different. But they're not understanding that often there is a misperception that happens here, and that's where all the problems are. So they do still need to be talking to you to understand there are times when we don't need you to step in with a thought.
Yeah, and I also saw that in Butterfly last few years, we have at least 10 members, they have different issues to contact the law enforcement. But at the end, they are giving the warning, you are not allowed to work anymore. So that they also give the warning that I will call CBSA. And later on, there will be a story to tell you that she is working in Toronto. The anti-trafficking initiative end up she is being arrested because the police call CBSA. So that's why I think that we would love to involve in any training, but I think we also want to emphasize any unwanted contact between the law enforcement or city staff will make the people more dangerous, because what we see is people will work more underground. Before, they are more open to work with us and open the door when we reach them because they have the trust. But when there is a lot of city staff or law enforcement come in, they may push more underground. They avoid to contact like other people. So that if this is a good intention, but we don't want to result in like the people more vulnerable. So that's why we really appreciate the report from the staff emphasize not conflating sex work and trafficking. Not only city staff, the police also need to know that. They also need to know all the policies should not increase the vulnerability of the worker. So that's why we are proposing like the alternative. We are willing to work with the city staff to see how we can develop the measure, because we really see the eager city want to reach out the marginalized, and we can become the bridge, right? So just like before we have the issue with law enforcement, we become the bridge, and then the worker can meet the law enforcement and talk about the issue. And we really think this model is very effective and save a lot of time. So, and resources when like all city cutting that you don't want to like have this city staff cannot do anything, but we are the people, know the community very well. Not only sex worker community, we also have Workers' Action Center, CCNCTO, they reach out the marginalized worker, FCJ, they reach out the refugees. So then how we can work closely and then develop the model that the city can deliver the information and message to the community, and the people in vulnerable situation or they are trafficked, they can get help without panic and without threatening whole community. Because you may want to help one or two people, but what you do, you suggest like a lot of surveillance. For the police angle, they are helping, but from the workers' angle, they are surveillance, they are monitoring, and there is a lot of issue going on. As the background, you know, sex work is being criminalized. Immigrant is the issue for many people. They don't know whether I talk with you will bring me any risk, not only myself, but other people. We have a woman, she has document, but after she got call the police come in, arrest her co-worker, she don't have documents. So that we don't want this anything happen. And we also don't know how city will share the information. So that's why we have really appreciate the city report, but we have like the concern about this area. So, and so that's why we hope the city councillor will support our little bit amendment, continues to work with the staff to see what is the best way to reach out the community.
Right.
We can reach out the community with not go to the workplace. If you go to the workplace, cannot reach out the community, that is the fail, right? So that the purpose is reach out the people, and then how we can have the way that the message and the help can reach out the people by working together.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Lai, question.
Thank you very much for the nice presentation. Actually, and this piece is actually very educational to me personally, because being new to this, I really I like your passion in helping, and I think the city is very lucky to have agency like yours to helping all these most vulnerable people. I just have a very quick question for you. Do you have this piece in different languages?
Yes, so that we have Chinese information, so and some migrant workers organization, we also have French. So, but this is the project funded by city actually, so that we are able to deliver the message, reach out the people, so that we hope that we have like more resources that we can translate it to different language. And this is very important. It is not from top up, but it is from the real life experience, what kind of situation the worker may place, right? So that like that how you can support yourself. So that's why we think that is like better than like the top-up model. You just give the very difficult language resources that people don't understand. This is really accessible, developed by working with.
That's I just wanted to know, because you know those are the people who require to read and understand what it is. If I may ask for a Chinese version,
yes, sure,
it would be wonderful. And thank you very much for all your work that you've done in your association. And that's the question I have.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's really lucky that that we have the staff really listen to the sex worker, and then we hope that the city councillor will also continues to ask city, no matter to police or different department, to respect the sex worker, because it's always been discrimination and marginalized, and having your support is very important to make them work safely and respect the human right.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Councillor Grimes?
Yes. Oh, hello.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you for the great work your organization does, and it's a great wealth of information, I'm sure, for our city staff. Just on Councillor Lai's questioning, you said it's in Chinese and in French. How many languages does your organization think this could be written in?
So that we are still very small organization, so that like we mainly speak Chinese. So, but we also have some workers as we outreach, they speak Thai or Korean. So that we have different information with different language, but we don't have a lot of support. We would like to have more resources.
Okay, I understand that, but you've got Thai, Korean, French, Chinese. Like, how many more languages are out there that you think that we need?
So because we work with Asian like sex workers, so that like that is the Asian like also the Southeast Asian South Asian language, so that we may also need like extra support of that. So that we are looking forward, like we get more support that we can work with different. So for example, we work with different legal clinic and work with different like ethnic groups, so that we can work together to develop like the material.
Thank you. Keep up the great work.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Grimes. Our next speaker is Winnie Nang, Good Jobs for All Coalition. Ms. Nang, hello. Let me know when you're ready, ma'am, and we'll start the timer. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Good morning. Hi. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Winnie Ying. I'm here representing the Good Jobs for All Coalition. The Good Jobs for All Coalition is an alliance of community, labor, youth, and environmental organizations in Toronto region. Founded in 2008 during the global financial crisis, the coalition has been working towards creating and building healthy communities, sustainable economy, strong public services, equity, and decent work for all. We are here strongly supporting the outreach and organizing work of Butterfly. We welcome also the staff report and recommendations on a more proactive approach in supporting victims of human trafficking. We do, however, have a couple of concerns over how that outreach and how that training should be done, and here are my comments. From the coalition, we believe that sex trade workers are workers just like everybody else. And it's critical that the proposed model of outreach does not end up becoming another barrier, impeding workers in accessing services and information. It's also important to recognize that the city staff are not there and are not here as morality squad. The recommendations and amendments put forth by Butterfly will be a much more viable alternative. I also want to just comment that body massage parlor workers are rarely sex workers. In fact, I personally know a number of them who used to be in professional occupations or civil servants in their home countries, and due to their limited English fluency, they end up going through 6 months massage training before immigrating, and then upon arrival taking on these survival jobs just to make ends meet. If we genuinely want to deal more effectively with human trafficking, we need to broaden the scope and not just singling out the sex trade industry. We must dig deeper. We must not get sidetracked by other agendas, i.e. including those who are simply unhappy with the fact that some people work as sex trade workers. On the two of our major newspapers, Toronto Star and Globe Mail, in recent months have focused on covering the human trafficking. And like the colleagues earlier from FCJ refugee centers, what we are seeing is human trafficking. It's a phenomenon, growing phenomenon that's taking place in very different industries like hotel, hospitality, food processing, food services. They include some big names player, like Westin hotels that have been named in the Globe and Mail article. And how could they be lured to this web of exploitation and human trafficking? Well, a lot of bad things happened in the rush for cheap labor. And that's very much our concern. The Toronto Star wrote about what police are calling human trafficking as the modern-day slavery. And there's one account that actually workers, after deductions, leaving him with $100 for 2 weeks' work cleaning hotels while living in an unheated attics with 30 others who each have paid a recruiter thousands of dollars to secure well-paying jobs in Canada. So it brings me to my conclusions that while it's critical in supporting the victims of human trafficking, it's equally important to monitor and clamp down the source of this underground human supply chain. I think it's incumbent upon the city not to get involved in reducing and clamping down the source of this underground labor. Let's not criminalize the workers, but criminalize the recruiting agencies, the temp agencies, and employers who use these agencies to profit on the back of all these vulnerable workers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just see if there's any questions for you. There are no questions for you at this time.
Thank you.
I'm going to thank you very much for your presentation. Our next speaker is Sandra Cajon Chu, Canadian HIV and AIDS Legal Network. Thank you. You may begin when you're ready. Let me know, and I'll start the time. And you'll be the last speaker until after we have our next presenter, which is a timed item at 12.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sandra Cajon Chu. I'm the Director of Research and Advocacy at the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network. We're a human rights organization that works with people living with and affected by HIV in Canada and globally. And we're also a proud member of the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform, which is a group that works to promote the human rights of sex workers in Canada and globally. So earlier this year, I wanted to talk about a report we just produced called The Perils of Production. I actually shared it with, I think, all city councillors. This is what it looks like. Here's a hard copy of the report. And the purpose of this was to document sex workers' experiences with law enforcement in Ontario. And one of the pervading themes that we found in our research was how laws and policies depict all human trafficking as sex trafficking, while conflating sex work with sexual exploitation. And this has resulted in really profound harms for sex workers, including those who live and work in Toronto. What sex workers told us was that law enforcement are empowered to aggressively surveil and interrogate them as part of their anti-human trafficking investigations. Though oftentimes these investigations merely served as a pretext to raid people's workplaces and interrogate them and investigate immigration infractions, which could lead to their detention and deportation. Far from being protective, these law enforcement interventions force sex workers to work in unsafe ways to evade law enforcement, and deterred workers from actually reporting abuse and exploitation when it happened. So it created this hostile working environment between sex workers and law enforcement, and they were driven. There was a hostile working relationship, but they would not report when actual violence occurred. As the World Health Organization has actually stressed, activities such as rescue raids of sex work establishments have exacerbated violence against sex workers and compromised their safety. At the same time, a singular focus on anti-trafficking activities has negatively affected the services that are available to sex workers. As one sex worker in Toronto told us, this whole trafficking initiative and the money that has been given to cops or specific agencies has really turned their eyes to the most marginalized sex workers in this city. They have to go through these exit programs to get, or they lose their funding. So a lot of agencies who took on this money are really at a place of abandoning their service users and really opting to get people to go through these exit programs. They only have programming for women that either want to get out or that are trafficked. Project participants also described how sex workers feel pressured from law enforcement and social service providers to identify as victims in order to receive support. As one interviewee shared, so women can't be like, oh, I'm here because I choose it, and they feared they could get in trouble for something. So instead they say to police, oh yeah, I really don't want to be doing this, and just present to police as they want to be presented as. More broadly, the Global Commission on HIV and the Law, an expert body of jurists, has noted that the conflation of sex work and sex trafficking has forced sex workers to work clandestinely and undermined their collective power to improve their wages or working conditions, enjoy the protection of labor law, or join together in trade unions or another organization, whose benefits include access to public health care or the empowerment to establish health services run by sex workers themselves. To conclude, I urge the city to ensure that sex work and trafficking are not conflated and to meaningfully consult with groups like Butterfly and Maggie's to ensure this does not manifest in the city's anti-human trafficking policies, programs, and activities, to support all vulnerable people in precarious working conditions who may be at risk of all forms of trafficking, not just sex trafficking, to reject increasing interventions in workers' workplaces which alienate workers from law enforcement when they do face situations of abuse, and instead ensure that services and supports are easily accessible and available to all people, not just those who identify as trafficked, to adopt a human rights approach to all individuals engaged in the sex industry, and to uphold the city's access without fear policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Do we have this one in writing? Do we have your?
No, but I can send it in.
You can send that.
That would be wonderful, because I may have questions after reading it again. It was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions for me.
Sure.
Quickly. And I get just dawned on me. So how do you, or how in general, do you reach out to someone who is defined or is characterized as I don't even know if that's the right word, as a sex worker versus, someone who is being trafficked to job, because they're not one and the same. Is that
Right.
correct? That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do you
How do
reach
they
out?
reach out to you? How do they know that the services are available? Because I'm assuming that some of the, at least so I hear the news, the sex workers are either kept contained and are larger removed from the broader society as such. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's my sense of understanding. How do they know? How do they reach out to organizations as such?
Like for our report, for instance, we work with organizations that have a long-standing history with sex workers. They are the ones who are trusted. Organizations like Maggie's, like Butterfly, some of the organizations you heard from today, they have built that trust over years, and we know, and they trust us as we're our intermediary in getting to talk to people, because they're hugely criminalized and stigmatized community. So I would suggest investing in these organizations that do that work already.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to just step this item down in order to deal with our timed item. In fact, there are two items that's being attached to that. One is the economic outlook, which is, we have a speaker, and then EC 5.12. So I'd like to now invite Dawn Desjardins, excuse me, I have a bit of a cold here, Vice President of and Deputy Chief Economist, Royal Bank. Dawn Desjardins is a key contributor to the macro forecast for Canada and the U.S. and is part of a team that is responsible for the interest rate forecast for both countries. Dawn delivers economic analysis to RBC clients through a variety of publications and presentations. Prior to joining RBC, Dawn worked as a reporter for Bloomberg Financial News in Toronto, covering the Canadian bond and currency market, and was the Canadian bond market strategist for a major U.S. bank for 10 years. She's a graduate of the University of Toronto. And welcome. I believe this is your first time to our committee. Welcome to. I just wonder if we can just kind of keep the noise down a little bit so we can get the presenter to speak. Let me know when you're ready, and we welcome you to our committee this morning. There's a timer on the side just to give you an indication as to timing, but you have beyond the 5 minutes because this is a presentation for you. So we welcome you to committee, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
I'd like to just give you a briefing on what we see happening in the economy, thinking probably starting at the biggest picture, because we certainly are seeing a lot of uncertainty facing the global economy, not just in Canada or in Toronto, but certainly on a global scale. We have Brexit, an ongoing issue in the UK and for the European Union. We have lots of trade policies that are causing disruption, I'd say, in the global economy. And in fact, when we look at measures like this is a policy measure saying how uncertain is the environment out there, and certainly when you look at that gray line, we are operating under a very heightened level of uncertainty. I think perhaps most important in terms of this issue is what's happening with the U.S. and China and their trade negotiations, or lack thereof. Certainly we were lulled into, I think, a sense of complacency. We thought everything was going well until recently, and now we have seen tariffs being raised, levies being put on more and more items. And so we do feel that the global economy is really starting to feel the ill effects of this. Certainly when we look at global growth, we look at some metrics such as global trade volumes, they are actually declining. They haven't been declining for a very long time, so it certainly is something that is of concern. We look at business sentiment indices. Globally, we are seeing a weakening in sentiment. Businesses are saying they aren't seeing the same number of new orders. Exports, of course, under pressure. And to some extent, this might be filtering into labor markets. So global growth is expected to decelerate compared to last year. Now, I don't think it's so much that it's going to be a 3.3% growth rate that's important. It's more the direction and the fact that the risks to 2020 are increasingly to the downside. Now, even though the U.S., I kind of think of it as the pinnacle of uncertainty at the moment, that economy is actually growing quite well. Grew close to 3% last year, and the first quarter of this year continued to grow at a greater than 3% pace. And what's driving the U.S. economy is a very tight labor market, the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, and wage growth that is accelerating. The Trump administration also made changes to laws regarding businesses, so corporate income tax rates and other policies being more stimulative for businesses, trying to incent them to spend, to invest. The U.S. expansion is about to hit the 10-year mark, and that's quite long for an economic expansion. And certainly, the stimulus, I think, is helping the U.S. economy. But when we look at Canada, not so rosy a picture. We certainly stumbled in the fourth quarter of 2018. Low oil prices, combined with a housing market correction that deepened, in fact, did drive our growth rate to less than half a percentage point in the fourth quarter of last year. And we see evidence that, in fact, that slower growth persisted into early 2019. But there is positive news on that front. The oil price correction, we're seeing a recovery in oil prices. The curtailments that the Alberta government put in, we think are going to ease off and in fact go away by the end of this year. So that's going to take some of the weight off the economy. On the housing market side of the equation, we certainly are seeing evidence that a bottom is being formed in most areas. Not in Victoria or in Vancouver, but in most other major cities. So that, too, will lighten some of the weight on our economy, and we expect to see growth move back towards our potential growth rate. Now, one thing that Canada does have in common with the United States is a very tight labor market. Our unemployment rate challenging 44-year low. We have seen wage growth accelerate here as well, but not quite as firmly as in the U.S. But having said that, there's lots of job vacancies. At the end of 2018, StatsCan estimates about 500,000 jobs that were left vacant. So lots of demand for labor. It's encouraging that we will continue to see, we think, strong employment gains, a low unemployment rate, and we're also beginning to see an increase in offering wages. So it's not throughout the whole economy, but at the margin, wage growth is accelerating quite sharply. And of course, that is a pretty important fundamental. As we know, households in Canada have elevated levels of debt on their balance sheets. And as interest rates have moved up, what we have seen is those debt service costs have risen. So we do need to see this wage growth accelerate in order to mitigate that impact on our household sector. Regionally, we have Ontario's economy growing 1.6%. This year, 1.7% in 2020. Sorry, flip that. But anyway, 1.6, 1.7%. So largely in line with, I guess, the Ontario economy's potential. We also are kind of long in the tooth, if you will, in terms of our economic expansion. So we've had a sustained period of growth. Now, if we look at one of the key areas where we are seeing a slowing for the Ontario economy, and of course, it is the housing market correction that got underway in 2017 and really continued as we went through last year. Home sales here in Toronto fell about 16% last year. But having said that, when you look at this benchmark price chart, you can see that hasn't had a significant impact on prices. Certainly prices are down from the very lofty levels, and the pace of price appreciation has slowed considerably, but prices have not plummeted. They've not gone through a housing market crash. In fact, if anything, what we're seeing is our housing market is perhaps in better balance with respect to supply and demand. Now, one thing that we have going for us in Ontario and in Toronto is the fact that we too have a very strong labor market, and we do think that we're going to continue to see job gains in the province. But what happened to the housing market really was more of a policy-related slowing. We had not only had interest rates moving up, we also had more strident stress testing for people who wanted to get a mortgage, and of course, local provincial policy changes that were effective as governments tried to reduce the amount of speculative behavior in our housing market. Because certainly when we look at Toronto now, it's increasingly the case that our housing market is unaffordable. We're not quite at the peak level of Vancouver, but certainly from our historical vantage point, we are right now in a very unaffordable housing market. And in fact, we have seen this considerable recalibration, I guess I'd say, in terms of home sales activity, falling well below our trend or our long-term average in terms of home sales. And we do think that the April data that came out really shows us that we're probably getting to the bottom of this correction. We saw a significant increase in home sales activity in April, mild increase in March, but a much more significant increase in April. So we do think that we're going to see housing market activity settle down here. We're not going to go back, in our view, to these very elevated levels of home sales and price appreciation that we had been seeing. Certainly when we look, this is just sort of the average, but even within those some months, the data showed a 30% increase in home prices. Clearly unsustainable. So with interest rates having moved up, affordability conditions having deteriorated, and then we have those policy changes, I don't think it's any great shock that we are seeing this correction in home prices. It really is quite needed to improve the affordability of our market. Now, in terms of what's going on with the building side of the equation, we have a lot of homes, as we know, under construction, but we're building it off very low levels of inventory. So we don't feel that it's an imbalance is being created. So overall, I guess I would say that the outlook is really quite uncertain because of policies outside of our country. Not so much within Canada, though we have some of those issues as well. From the Bank of Canada's point of view, I think this sets up for them to maintain their policy rate at 1.75%. We know that that's moved up 1.25% from the very low levels that we saw. That started in the middle part of 2017, so it really is going through the system now. And we think given this weak patch our economy slipped into because of those transitory factors, arguably, as well as the external environment, which is increasingly uncertain, they probably will want to step back from making any further interest rate increases. They'll want to keep a little bit of stimulus impacting our economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have questions. Councillor Carroll.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry, just visiting Councillor, I'm sorry, just let me know if you have any questions on any of the matters. Thank you. Councillor Carroll, you may begin.
Yes, the unemployment rate, Ontario and Toronto, are these adjusted for the drop in the participation rate?
No, we don't adjust for that. I mean, that's just, the unemployment rate is just generated by the labor force, as well as employment.
Because I took a look in advance of this, Mr. Williams showed me our most recent dashboard, which probably is first quarter, January. Yeah. So the title of this slide is "The Economy Isn't the Issue," quite the contrary, and it does look like our unemployment rate it's had some spikes, but it's not been too bad.
No.
It is at the moment falling if you factor in participation rate, because
Yeah.
participation rate is dropping. So when you
yeah.
add that in, then you see you do have a bit of a problem. Meanwhile, globally, or at least across the country, I think you say earlier on here that really we actually, the labor market actually needs more people in the. So where's the disconnect there? We have a falling employment rate, but in fact,
Sorry, that's the
more workers are
unemployment rate.
needed.
That unemployment rate is the chart.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
We have a falling employment rate. We have people who need jobs, and yet it looks like the labor market needs them. How are we not getting them to the labor market?
Well, I
Where's
think
the
it's
disconnect?
a mismatch in skills. A lot of times when we look at surveys, Canadian Federation of Independent Business does do a survey regularly, I think in fact monthly. And when you look at what businesses are saying, they're saying that they can't get the skilled labor that they need. That's a big impediment to growth, or it's a mismatch between who's applying for the job and what they actually need. So arguably, it is this mismatch that's going on in the economy right now. And we have been, as we know, at such an extended expansion period.
Right. So when that happens, what does the economist in a financial institution do? We have, skilled labor unions, skilled labor advocacy organizations come to us and say, we need to get more people into the trades. We need a little more runway to get more people into apprenticeships and training, so that we can get to the jobs that are needed. They come knocking on the door of government. So when the financial institution looks at this, do you advocate for that? Hey, government, spend some money on that, deal with that disconnect. Do you advocate to the higher orders of government that could be done at ground level? We should be doing the skills training right here in local communities. And I mean across the country, not just Toronto, such that your voice going to the federal government or the provincial governments will actually help us to be able to deliver, and our skilled trades organizations deliver.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things we are on the record, our CEO in particular, is work integrated learning. The real necessity of all Canadian students to have the opportunity to do work and to develop skills, perhaps to even, just see what's out there so that they can pivot if they need to do so. We've also done a lot of work on the skills economy, trying to figure out, what is the worker of tomorrow going to look like? Our work suggests that 25% of jobs today, they won't be around as we go forward. 25 on the top of that will be heavily disrupted. So it means that we need to rethink all of our education. How do we get people to build skills?
Yes.
As opposed to just, obviously, we need to have the basics down, the math, the literacy, et cetera. But we also have to have the ability to problem solve. All these different skills that really you almost have to get in a workplace.
Yes, yes.
So it is. So that is one of the things we do advocate quite heavily for, is work integrated learning.
In our local stats, we see, in particular places, I think I made a note of the biggest online killing retail. And that's where a lot of our established newcomers, once they're established, any number of members of the family are going to end up there. And at least for a number of years or generationally. And yet that's where a big drop is in terms of employment, I think, because retail, big boxes shrinking, particular areas, clothing is bought online, things that people thought you'd never buy online for fit are now happening online. So
Last question, Councillor.
So is there work going on in the private sector to retool for that, to push to upskill those folks so that they have what are the jobs that are going to continue?
I mean, that is sort of what our humans wanted, we've called the report, and certainly happy to send you a copy of it. But it is really advocating these types of reskilling and trying to figure out what jobs they have in common. And then saying, okay, so if you have this set of skills and you're doing this job is going away, what do you have to do? How many skills do you have to build or accumulate to be able to pivot and shift into another occupation? So that is something that we're looking at and trying to figure out a way to deliver that message, that we have to reskill our population. We know that, as you're saying, many industries. So it is that type of thing, but I will send you a copy of that.
I would love that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Grimes, a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don, on page 7 under the provincial GDP growth, I see Alberta, they've got a big rebound up to 2.6, well, not big, but so that's all based on oil prices.
Yeah, and the curtailment's ending?
Yeah. So what about BC? BC is 2.5 for 19 and 20. What is that?
That's the LNG facility. Certainly that investment flowing into the economy over the next 5-10 years is very important and a driver of economic growth. We have business spending intentions survey put out by Stats Canada, and BC 12% increase in terms of business investment. So that is a key driver of that forecast.
And with the dollar sitting in 74 and change right now, is that to our advantage, having the low Canadian dollar in this market?
Is it
an advantage for Canada having that low dollar?
I think there's so many complicated things going on in the trade environment. I mean, certainly, you know, it could provide some support, but it's more the demand side, I think, just overall, and our relationships with countries. We know we've gone through such a rocky patch with the United States with their steel and aluminum tariffs, and yes, we're getting some progress on that front. Getting the USMCA signed, another key thing. China, of course, now banning our canola. So we're having some issues on the trade side. The currency, I don't know, is going to be able to mitigate the impact of that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grimes. Anyone else? Question? Just a few for me. Can you help me to understand? So the dispute between China and the U.S., and I guess to a lesser extent Canada and China, Huawei and so on.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that China has purchased a lot of American bonds, T-bills, et cetera, and to that degree. And so when I think about this dispute, I'm wondering, what is the impact should China react in terms of pulling its investments from and selling some of these instruments? How does that impact the U.S. economy, and does it have a more adverse impact as it relates to having a trade agreement, or just to address those fundamental issues? I mean, how stark is that?
I mean, they are. I think Japan and China are the biggest holders of U.S. Treasury bonds. But it would be kind of, biting their nose to spite their face, if you will, because, of course, right away, prices would fall significantly. And so their investment, they'd have to absorb a lot of losses.
Okay.
And so we're all kind of pondering that, but we don't think that, from an economic point of view, that would be a path they would follow. So we wouldn't give that a very high odds of occurring. Not to say it couldn't.
Right.
Certainly, there's always good demand from U.S. Treasury bonds across the world. It's the largest, most liquid market, and people want to be in that because they can get in and out.
Right. So when I look at your first diagram, I don't know if you can probably put that up. It's the policy uncertainty elevated. So when I look at the vertical axis, you've got numbers going from 50 to 300, and the horizontals 2019. So in between 2018 and 2019, there's a cross-sectionality there. And when we talk about policy uncertainty and uncertainty in general, we talk about Canada and Toronto, for example, as a place to come to invest. We use the expression, there's a great deal of certainty, and there's a stability. So on the face of that, we are correct in terms of how we're projecting and presenting ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing, though, is that because we do have some policy uncertainty, whether it's about pipelines, for example, these types of issues, I do think, is tarnishing our reputation a bit. Because when an investor comes here, they want to put money into our economy. If they don't feel that their plan is going to be actionable and that there'll be all kinds of blocks to doing that, I think that does, it does cause some trouble. So we looked at the data, and when you're looking at foreign direct investment, for example, over the last year, between 2017 and 2018, for every dollar that foreign companies put into Canada, $6 of Canadian money went out. So we're seeing our own companies, in fact, invest outside.
Right. And so the other issue that I wanted, perhaps if you can help us to understand, realizing that looking at the totality of the Canadian economy, but there's another aspect to our economy, that's the underground economy. How does that, in terms of what would be that number, for example? Do you do that work to say the underground economy is valued at $5 billion, $50 billion, and so on? Is there any work being done there? Because as I understand it, there's a huge underground economy that is seeping into and having an impact on much of the things that we do, whether or not it's taxation, collection for the government and so on. I'm just wondering, do you assess that as well, and is that a real factor?
I mean, we don't have a assessment ourselves. I'm not sure if Statistics Canada may have some data on that, so I can look, and if I see anything, just you let me know it to you.
Sure, and then I guess my final question, we kind of talked a little bit about the fact that there are 500,000 jobs that are available, but having the right skill set to fit those. What, if you could today, tell the millennials who are looking at the job market in terms of the preparation, what is it they need to be doing? And is it a global outlook or is it a local outlook? How would you advise them?
I would say definitely global, and preparing yourself to, as we've discussed earlier, amass this amount of skill set. Try to get involved in things that make you, things like problem solving. It sounds very simple, but until you actually develop the skill to be able to look at, I mean, these are the critical things that we're going to need for the future. Machine learning is going to do a bunch of stuff, and some of it will be problem solving, but really the human element in a lot of this, it is our ability to do these things. So it is, I would say, try to, if you can get work integrated learning during your schooling, do it.
Right, okay. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. To speak, Councillor Carroll, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, I did want to speak. I'm always happy when we have an economist come from the financial service sector to give us their take on things, as they tend to elevate it a little bit to the globe beyond our own dashboard. But I ask the questions I ask because I hope I hope they then in turn turn around and do a deep dive in our more granular local look, our economic dashboard, because I think they really could be a voice for us. Recently, around some of the changes in provincial legislation and some of the struggles we have around Bill 66 and others, we all had skilled trades, apprenticeship organizations, the hammerheads of the world and the other programs coming to see us about their ability. They could actually be training more people. They could be pulling more people into that. And yet we struggle with, well, that's great. We can't really help you financially. Go your best lick. Do what you're going to do. But in actual fact, when you see, misnamed right to work type of legislation moving through the province, and heaven forbid, but after the federal election could even be moving through the federal scene, those types of legislations really contradict what an economist has just told us we need to be making sure that people can get into those thriving, well-paying, skilled trades jobs. But it's not a single order of government's role to help them do it. It really needs the legislative backup from those other orders of government that we partner with or try to partner with from day to day. So I'm really grateful for the presentation. I'm not going to move a motion because I know that Ms. Desjardins will take this back, that we really need their voice saying that needs to be happening. They understand that it happens on local levels with local organizations and local governments, but that they have an easy door in to speak to those other orders of government. So if they say that, it's only going to help us fill that labor market gap that they keep reporting on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carroll. Any other person to speak? Okay, none. All right, I will speak for a moment. I'm always very happy when we have the economists coming in and giving us a measure, a look at where we are and where we're going, and it's really interesting. I remark on my days as a university student in economics, these models and these graphs all sort of come back, and it's like back in school again, but they're fantastic, and it's very helpful. clearly, we know that there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the world, and I think that we, in our space as a municipality, have to do the things that we need to ensure that our citizens are able to have options and opportunities and so on. We've been, on this committee, embarking on great efforts to ensure that we attract foreign investment and so on. Mr. Desjardins has indicated for every one we bring in, we have 7 going out in terms of Canadian companies also looking globally to create opportunities and so on. I might add that some of the large funds, some of the OMERS and others, and who is our pension fund that we pay into, are doing great things globally, and of course they're doing things locally as well. So there's a benefit, and really that's the point I'm making. These numbers are really important, and the graphs are very important, and I know that as we move further in the second piece of this, which is the economic outlook that the general manager will present a little bit later, and I'm going to ask the general manager to do that with respect to the bulletin a little bit later after our speakers, because we still have speakers, and we're breaking for lunch in a minute or so. But I want to just again thank Ms. Desjardins for the presentation. I always find with these things, you take them back and you kind of have a moment to look through, and you realize that you should have asked a question, or it's very helpful. So I know that there's great challenges right now in the world economy. The superpowers are battling, and I'm hoping at some point that some resolution will be arrived at in terms of the dispute with China and the U.S. and even our own dispute with China. We do a lot of work with Chinese cities, some of our sister cities, relationship that we have globally. I know that some of the members of the Chinese business community that we met with last week at Collision, they too are hopeful. So all of our citizens are hopeful that we're able to resolve these. Yeah, so just... Thank you, Councillor Grimes. So this is really important, and I think just on the final piece that I want to talk about, and it's about the training and problem solving. That is such a universal requirement that while we train for things, we have to train to be able to solve problems. One of the things that we've been very active in is trying to work with our institutions and our businesses and so on, looking to see how they can actually provide the appropriate training and the skill sets that actually is needed for tomorrow. And we've learned that 25% of the jobs as we know them now will not be here. And AI and all the autonomous vehicles moving around and moving people and so on. And I think we need to ensure that we insist on not only the STEM activities and so on, but now you need, sometime a degree to program one of these things, right? I mean, and this is only a phone. Some of the machinery that we're using in factories and so on, in this city clearly requires that level of skill set and training. So we need to make sure that we're there and encourage that. The collaboration between labor that Councillor Carroll spoke of, I think that's extremely important. Some of the training and the work that labor does to help our young people to be able to have access to opportunity, because without those access and those hope, then we obviously are not doing a good service to help them to be ready for the workforce of the future, because it is definitely going to be dramatically different from what we understand it to be now. So on that, I will move receipt of the presentation, and again, reiterating our thanks to Ms. Desjardins for being here and to provide us with some great insight with respect to the way the economy, our economy, and the world economy is going. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. So, members, all those in favor of receiving the presentation? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you, and we'll recess till 1:30. Thank you, Madam. Okay. I can't afford for you guys to miss because Councillor
Attention, please. Could I ask everyone to please leave the room and the doors will be locked? The meeting will start again at